Good afternoon and welcome to the Ways and Means Committee bill hearings. Today is February the 8th. Before we get started, it's so nice of you to be on time, sir. Before we get started, I would like to introduce the committee to our new receptionist, Ms. Kelly Haynes Green. So I know a lot of us come in the back, as do I, but please try to go in the front and say hello, or just walk up and say hello so she doesn't get lonely. But we are very happy to have you here, so welcome. With that, I will call my bill. House Bill 272, and I would ask Mr. Richard Henry to please come forward. And I will come join you over there. And I will let Madam Vice Chair take over. Thank you, and good evening, committee. I am Chair Atterbury, and I am here to ask for your favorable report on House Bill 272. This is actually a very simple bill. All that this bill would do is require, absent an agreement between the county governing body and the local school board and the Maryland State Department of Education, and at the request of the Office of the Inspector General for Education, to contract for a performance audit for a local public school system to address issues raised in findings identified by the Office of the Inspector General for Education. And with that, I would like to turn it over to the expert here of why we need this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Co-Chair Wilkins, and members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the Office of the Inspector General for Education. I appreciate the committee's continued interest in quality audits for local school systems, and thank Delegate Atterbury for supporting this bill and the work of my office. I come before this committee to support House Bill 272 and discuss the proposed change to initiate an education performance audit. In 1996, the Maryland legislature established a process by which the Maryland Department of Education may request a performance audit in the absence of an agreement between a local governing body or school board. This article predates the 2019 establishment of the Office of the Inspector General for Education. Currently, the law directs that the department, or MSDE, at the request of the county governing board, shall contract for a performance audit of the county public school system to address the issues raised in the county's request. Unfortunately, the law only allows a governing body or school board to present the request to the department or the State Board of Education. A full performance audit last occurred in 2017 when interim Chief Executive Officer Dr. Monica Golson received numerous complaints alleging student grades had been manipulated to increase graduation rates. Due to these allegations, Dr. Golson exercised the provisions identified in Education Article 5.110 and requested that the department investigate complaints of grade manipulation to alter or increase graduation rates within the Prince George's County Public Schools. As a result of this request, the department issued a request for proposal, or RFP, to conduct a performance audit. To save time, the performance audit found several key findings. Prince George's County Public Schools governance structure had performance gaps. Staff did not consistently adhere to policies and procedures related to grading and graduation certification. School-level record keeping related to grading and graduation certification needed improvement, and irregularities to grade changes and graduation certifications were identified. The auditors did not find that the school leadership directed staff to change grades. Additionally, the audit did not
And
find...
I'm sorry, sir, if you could just wrap up with your final thought.
Thank you. Again, this is a first for me, and I appreciate everybody's patience. But in this particular case, what we're looking for is to have a seat at the table when we find some type of allegation of waste, fraud, or abuse. Currently, the law does not provide us the opportunity to even approach or even have a seat at the table. So we can make any recommendations, but unfortunately, the State Board of Education nor MSDE even has to entertain. And we need to change that, especially since our office is now in and has been established.
Thank you. You did a wonderful job. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Henry. I do see one other person favorable with amendments, John Willems, if he's here. I know Madam Chair has a hearing, so.
I do. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And I see that Delegate Ebersol has a question. If it's for me, I'm happy to respond when I return. I don't want to get caught in judiciary's turmoil. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, John Willems representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. And yes, as the Inspector General for Education pointed out, there were findings related to the grading policies in Prince George's County. I do want to assure the committee that MSDE followed suit by updating their regulations and requiring not only the reporting of local school systems to MSDE on their grading policies, but actually providing for the additional authority of review and approval of those grading policies. So there was some pretty significant regulatory action in response to that. I agree with the chair, of course, that this is a rather simple and straightforward bill. In looking at the statute that governs these performance audits, however, it did occur to us, that there is existing language in the law that excludes from these performance audits evaluations of the county board's efforts to meet the standards of the Maryland School Performance Program, and would want to append that, add to that by including the blueprint for Maryland's future, in that the role of reviewing and assessing our performance under the blueprint is solely the plenary responsibility of the Accountability and Implementation Board, and so would not want to confuse or duplicate efforts related to performance audits conducted through the provisions of this bill with the accountability that is heftily built into the blueprint. And so with that, request a favorable report on the bill with the amendments identified in Mabe's testimony. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for this panel? Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yeah, great idea. We have to make sure that we're sticking to it. I'm glad you guys are here. I'm reading the fiscal note, and it suggests that per audit it would cost anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 for a local jurisdiction. So who calls for these audits, and how can you give me an estimate of how often you think these might come up, and what kind of expenditure we might be, mandated expenditure we might be putting on local school systems or local jurisdictions?
Certainly. In this particular case, as I said, this is something that we just want to be able to present to the State Board or Department of Education if it's warranted. Not every investigation, every investigative audit that we look at is going to raise to the level of a full performance audit. The last suggestion that we had was with Baltimore City, because Baltimore City's review that we actually found 12,500 students whose grades were changed from passing to failing, along with the enrollment irregularities investigation that we had going on, felt as though it was warranted. Right. But not every investigation would raise to that level.
Just so, given when you might have been interested in doing it in the past, can you, I was asking for an estimate of how often this might occur, because it's going to involve cost. I understand the need, but I want to get a sense of the overall cost, maybe per year or over a 5-year period. How often do you think?
Well, Delegate, I'm hoping it never occurs. You know, that school systems themselves, they have their own internal audit units and that they're finding these issues themselves. But when these things result as a result of our investigation, it might raise to that level. So to tell you that we're going to have 3 that occur this year, I don't want to mislead you. We might not have none. We might not have none again for another year or 2. But if we find something that is very egregious and it raises to that level, we'd like to have the opportunity to present it to the State Board and to MSDE and present our findings of why we feel that an audit above a standard in-house audit is required.
So it would be fair to say right now that you really can't predict.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Feldmark.
Chair, just for clarification, my question is for Mr. Woolhams. The amendment you're requesting with regard to the blueprint, is that narrowly just for questions of assessing compliance with the blueprint? I mean, the blueprint is fairly broad in terms of it, you know, the topics it covers. Are you speaking just to assessing implementation of the blueprint, or are you saying anything under the blueprint would be exempt?
Delegate, it's a good question, and compliance is probably, you know, too narrow a word, and performance is too broad a word. The concern was that when you talk about performance audits, they by definition expand beyond purely fiscal audits, and our performance under each of the 5 pillars of the blueprint and the assessment of our performance under those pillars is all within the purview of the accountability board's increasing authority. So right now we have to submit plans that meet the framework outlined in their statewide implementation plan. But within a couple years, we have to be implementing the blueprint with fidelity, and there are strict financial penalties for not doing so, with the withholding of at least 25% of the additional state funding for not implementing the blueprint with fidelity, so not fulfilling the performance goals and objective of the blueprint. So in that way, performance issues are fully covered by the AIB's authority. And if I could, in terms of housekeeping on this language, this is very old language. It actually predates the 2004 fiscal legislative audits that were established for fiscal accountability following implementation of the old Bridge to Excellence Act. But those legislative audits are not strictly fiscal audits. There are performance issues that are assessed in those. Every 6 years, every school system on a rolling basis is subject to a legislative audit. And so that's another way in which we're held accountable for performance issues relating to food service, transportation, and a whole host of other operational issues. So there's a lot of accountability. On the back of Mabe's testimony, I try to outline some of those audits and provisions to assure the committee that we are being held accountable.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any other questions from members? Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Vice Chairwoman. So, Mr. Woolham, so one question for you. We barely hear like you're supporting any bills, right? For this bill, you're supporting. So I'm glad to see that. So one question is, what's the challenge you're foreseeing this bill will bring forward?
I think the challenge of the bill without Mabe's amendments are really kind of inherent in the process of when a county government wants to engage in a performance audit of a local school system, and the school system balks at that notion and says, no, please don't, and let's not kind of invest the time and resources necessary to do that. There's a dispute resolution process in the statute that allows the state to essentially intervene and contract out for that audit. And it seems perfectly appropriate that such an audit could also be triggered by the recommendation of the Office of the Inspector General for Education. So our amendments don't change that in any way. But there is certainly the specter in some counties more than others of wanting to be continuously involved in the auditing of the performance of the school system, which we feel is basically other other entities' jobs, including the Inspector General, including MSD and the State Board, including the AIB.
Thank you, Delegate, and thank you so much to our witnesses for coming to testify. Seeing no additional questions, this concludes the hearing on HB 272. Next, we have HB 210, Delegate Ebersol, a Baltimore County local bill, so it is sponsor only.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I bring to you House Bill 210, which is a bill titled Baltimore County Board of Education Member Elections. Baltimore County has a hybrid Board of Education where 4 of the members are appointed and 7 of the members are elected. The appointments are done through an appointment process where there's an appointment board who nominates and the governor then appoints from a list of people. We discovered an anomaly in the bill. That is, if we have a governor who is considered to be a lame duck governor, if you will, does not win or participate in a primary, that governor may not make appointments after that primary. And this board does not make recommendations prior to the primary. Even in July, they were not done, even though we pushed back the primary this year. So we have a situation that we tried to correct with the bill last year, but it got hung up, as many bills do, on sine die over an amendment that I was sorry was the Senate tried to put on it. So we didn't get it through. What we have right now is a situation where the members who could have been, according to law, appointed in December for December 1st are not yet appointed. There are 4 members who are remaining on the board even to this day because the governor has not yet appointed them, because now he has no deadline. The law has no calling for him to necessarily appoint. We have a simple solution to this. The appointed members will serve until presidential years come, and that is when the board will make its recommendations, and that is when the governor, who is sitting and will not have the potential of being lame duck, will make the appointment. So the current members, when they do get appointed, will serve this time for a couple of years. And then after that, they'll serve in 4 years in between the presidential election years, and the elected members will serve in between the gubernatorial election years. The Baltimore County delegation has approved this bill unanimously, and you have a letter to that effect.
Wonderful. Thank you, Delegate Ebersol. Any questions? All right, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on HB 210. Next, HB 206, Delegate Ivy. Yes, please. Our former committee member who's rejoining us today.
Once a Ways and Means member, always a Ways and Means member, right?
Correct.
Well, welcome to the committee, Delegate. It truly is a pleasure to be back here on Ways and Means. I learned a lot here. I was the youngest delegate when I got here, and now I get to pass the torch to the new youngest delegate, Joe Vogel. Pleasure to see you. All right, we'll get to it now. Thank you for having us here, Chair Wilkins, Chair Vice, as some people say, members of the Ways and Means Committee. It's a pleasure to be here. For the record, Delegate Julian Ivey here presenting House Bill 206. This is a simple bill. It's a cleanup bill. Montessori programs were left out of the pre-kindergarten expansion grant program. I don't think intentionally, but because it's a unique program, they were nonetheless. So House Bill 206 would allow, with its amendments, and I hope that you all have those on in your system as well, will allow for the alignment of the operation requirements and staff requirements with the existing Code of Maryland Regulations, COMAR, allowing for Montessori schools to participate in the pre-kindergarten expansion grant program. I told you it was a simple bill. I'm here to stick to that. I do have individuals here who at this point are experts at state policy because they've been coming for a couple of years in a row now to advocate for Montessori schools being able to take part in various programs coming from the Blueprint for Maryland Future. So I do have letters of support from several organizations that are here sitting with me. I'll name a few of them: Montessori Public Policy Initiative, Montessori Schools of Maryland, Frederick Montessori Arts School, Country Day. Barry Institute, which did teach Will Smith, Senator Will Smith. He did go there as well. And we also have a letter from Baltimore Montessori Public Charter Schools, and I believe MSCA as well submitted a letter of support. I'm here for questions. These experts are as well, but I'm asking for a favorable report on House Bill 206. Thank you.
Next witness can begin.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wilkins, Delegate Ivy, and committee members. My name is Wendy Shank-Evans, and I live in Prince George's County, but I work nationally to increase access to Montessori education. Like many other states, Maryland has recognized that a robust mixed delivery system is needed to ensure that children and families will be well served by early childhood programs such as universal preschool. To create a robust mixed delivery system that provides equitable access for families, the needs of different provider types need to be taken into account. Family child care, Indigenous early childhood programs, and pedagogical approaches such as Montessori have both unique needs and quality markers, and states across the country are broadening their policies and parameters in early childhood funding streams to ensure that families have access to a wider variety of programs. HB 206, as amended, adjusts certain parameters within pre-kindergarten funding streams for Montessori programs, which will ensure that both public and private Montessori schools can be participating providers, giving children access to the many evidence-based benefits of a Montessori education. HB 206, as amended, brings the parameters of the pre-kindergarten funding streams into alignment with existing COMAR regulations regarding group sizes and ratios in Montessori schools. These group sizes and ratios are part of Montessori school accreditation because they are a marker of quality. It also aligns with existing Maryland law regarding Montessori teacher credentials. And finally, by enabling Montessori schools to be participating providers, counties will be more likely to achieve the established minimum proportion of eligible private providers that's required by the blueprint legislation. Thank you for your consideration, and I urge you to vote favorably on HB 206 as amended.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee. Thank you also to Delegate Ivy for introducing this important bill. I am here today to testify in support of HB 206 as amended. My name is Kavita Mehta, and I have been a Montessori student, a Montessori teacher, and a Montessori parent. In 2017, I opened Northcrest Montessori in Howard County. I am the chair of the board of directors of the Washington Montessori Institute, the oldest Montessori teacher education program in the U.S. I also serve on the board of Montessori Schools of Maryland, and I am here as their representative for our over 70 Montessori schools and our 4,000 Montessori students. Lastly, as a supporter of the pre-kindergarten expansion grant program, my school would not be able to participate without HB 206 as amended. Montessori schools are incredibly valuable for children, and research has shown strong cognitive, social, emotional, as well as executive functioning skill outcomes for students who attend Montessori schools. Montessori education is highly personalized, following each child's needs, and children learn to become creative, innovative, motivated, and persistent in their quest to learn something new. HB 206, as amended, will allow Montessori schools, both public and private, to be included in the pre-K expansion grant program's mixed delivery system by amending the maximum group size and adult-to-child ratios for Montessori. And as Wendy mentioned, these are already in line with current COMAR regulations for our MSDE-approved Montessori programs. As you will see from written testimony, our public school colleagues are in favor of this bill. Montessori educators know the tremendous strengths and benefits of a Montessori education, and therefore we want to make it accessible to as many children as we can. Passage of the proposed bill before you will help to advance that goal and ensure that Montessori is included in the pre-K expansion grant program. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I urge the committee to support HB 206.
Thank you, thank you, Vice Chair Wilkins and the esteemed Ways and Means Committee. My name is Christina Push, Executive Director of the Maryland State Child Care Association. MSCCA has numerous Montessori schools as members, and our priorities agenda as a nonprofit organization includes reducing early childhood workforce barriers, as well as to identify and support strategies for workforce development, and especially ensure that the leaders in our state recognize and support quality early learning environments for children birth to 5. HB 206 seeks to alter, which is a positive way to create an equitable alternative to achieve the goal of eligibility and inclusivity to participate in a mixed delivery of public pre-K. The Accountability and Implementation Board's final report related to Pillar 1, public pre-kindergarten recognizes barriers to mixed delivery and includes guidance which recommends alternative certification pathways for teachers in pre-kindergarten. Public pre-kindergarten. Currently, according to MSD, if a teacher is teaching a Montessori program and has Montessori certifications, the program also meets the other requirements they can apply for the public pre-K grant. HB 206 seeks to strengthen through law this model. Montessori schools' pedagogical approach and teacher qualifications should be a viable alternative to a traditional education model and available for all children of socioeconomic backgrounds in a public pre-K setting as best practice. Our country is facing a critical workforce shortage of educators, especially in early childhood settings. We should embrace opportunities to expand and support these alternatives, but not forego quality. MSCCA fully supports HB 206, which reinforces and expands the opportunities for community-based early childhood programs to want to participate and want to become eligible pre-kindergarten providers, which is necessary for a true, equitable, diverse mixed delivery system that the blueprint of Maryland aspires to achieve. We also ask for a favorable report.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you again, Delegate Ivy, for coming to visit us. Do we have any questions? Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We're familiar with this, and by the way, I want to say that although I've never been to a Montessori school or attended one, all the investigations I've ever done have said, you know, you're on par or better than what we're looking for. So good on you, and I want you to be part of the program. This bill makes some adjustments in ratios that are relevant to Montessori. It also makes some adjustments in certification because it puts up Montessori certification as correct certification. So my question is, does it make it clear that receiving the certification to teach in a Montessori setting does not transfer to a certification to teach in another setting in pre-K in the state?
Delegate Ebersol, I appreciate the question. And I think House Bill 467 from last year, which passed out of your subcommittee then, and congratulations on your new appointment.
Yeah, I don't get many of those. She gets most of them these days. It's good. Thanks.
That's true. That's true. She's not the parliamentarian anymore.
She is who she is.
That's right, Madam Chair Vice. But I think it made it very clear that if you are accredited to teach in Montessori, that you can't just teach in another non-Montessori program.
Mm-hmm. And we got that bill all the way through, and the Gov signed it, right?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
So that would stand in this case then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. It's a reassuring thing to know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Delegate Ivy, thank you for this bill. I think that definitely a lot of people here have good words about Montessori schools, right? I think my question is, are we going to have other exceptions in the future? For example, I'm thinking about other kindergarten schools in my neighborhood, for example, Columbia Academy or Brookfield Christian School, and many other private providers. Are we open the door for future expansion?
Programs already are included as community-based programs that could apply to be public pre-kindergarten grantees. They have the opportunity to do so now.
So the exception here is really class size, is that right? Or
the exception is to make sure that it's the qualifications, and then the group size is permissible, I believe, if you can expand on that.
Group size and ratio. So yeah, it addresses group size and ratios that are quality markers for Montessori programs, because they're designed differently, the ratios and group sizes are different. And so this is a way of allowing Montessori schools to be participating providers. In terms of whether it opens the door for other kinds of exceptions, I think each item needs to be treated individually. I think states across the country are looking at how to individualize policy where needed to ensure the broadest mixed delivery system and access to high quality programs for families.
So the point, like, it will be individualized to different types of pre-kindergarten, right? Like Montessori, maybe one type, you have one clause here. Then maybe for example, Columbia Academy or Brookfield Christian School, right? They have another set of exemptions. Is that the future direction?
And I appreciate the question. I think the reason why this legislation was needed in the blueprint, it was very clear the ratios and the number of teachers, the size of class that you had to have in order to be able to access the funding to the pre-kindergarten grant expansion program. And so because it was so prescriptive, Montessori schools were left out, because in Montessori schools, you'll have first, second, and third graders in one classroom together, and that is unique in the field of education. So that's why this piece of legislation was needed. And as far as opening a door, this committee is very familiar with closing them when they'd like to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on HB 206. Thank you.
Thank you all. See you tomorrow.
All right, we will start the hearing now for HB 265, Delegate Guyton. And your witnesses can come up. I have Brian Pugh, Martin Kerrigan, and Catherine Carter.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Members of the Ways and Means Committee, it is very strange for me to be on this side, but it's lovely to see all you beautiful people moved around to the front, so congrats to all of you.
Another former member, welcome back.
You will see me, you will feel like I never left this session. But so for the record, Delegate Michelle Guyton, Baltimore County District 42B, and I am pleased to be here before you today to ask for a favorable report on House Bill 265, designed to add an advisory panel to the Maryland Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports. This bill did pass this committee and the House last session, did not make it out of the Senate. There was some concerns about an amendment that was added that I voted for in this committee. But I do hope that this committee is mindful of that history as we hopefully move forward this year. I think we have a clear path in the Senate. I do have a cross-file in the Senate as well, Senator Karen Lewis-Young. So the members of this advisory panel established by House Bill 265 will assist the consortium. The consortium already exists. It was part of the blueprint plan in their task to develop standardized guidelines for our county boards regarding the information to be collected when students actually register for school, right? These questionnaires are already in existence. Every single one of our school systems is already collecting this information when a student registers to come to their programs, but the information that they're collecting is very different, right? Some of them are extremely extensive, like Baltimore County, which covers every sort of disability and issue that you might need to know about if you are a teacher or an administrator. And some of the other counties only have, a line that says, is there anything you want us to know about your child, right? You're not getting at the same information. So the reason that this was put in place for the consortium was that this information really is dramatically different. And it also affects the allocation of resources to each county. So the Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports, when it was established partly to remedy this situation. So this bill before you today, though, does nothing to change that. All this bill does is put into place a health advisory board to advise this already in place consortium when making recommendations about the topics to be included on this already statutorily necessary questionnaire. Right? The local boards still have all the autonomy that they love to write their own questions and administer the questionnaire as they deem fit. So the members being added through this legislation are subject experts in various disabilities, and the reason they're added and not already included is that these disabilities may mask behavioral and mental health issues, or they may be mistaken for them. And so why is that important that we know what those are? So if you work in the autism community, like I have for much of my career, you know that often kids with hearing loss can be initially diagnosed with autism or vice versa because they're not communicating well, right? Those require very different supports through the school system. Those with vision impairment might be diagnosed with a learning disability or dyslexia when in fact they may just need glasses. So we're trying to avoid those sorts of situations with this addition of the advisory group. So finally, it's a simple bill by expanding the expertise to advise the consortium, and the consortium can decide whether to take that advice or not. We capture more accurate data, and we support the needs of our diverse student population much better. So in addition to that change, this bill makes a technical change which was suggested last year in consultation with Rachel Heiss and the leadership of the Blueprint Commission to clarify that the screening that's already referenced in the Blueprint Consortium legislation is actually referring to a questionnaire. So there are some questions about that, and that was just to clarify the intent of the original legislation. Right? And this also adds a data privacy expert to this group because that is always a concern in this body. So I ask for your favorable support of House Bill 265, and I just want to point out that we have the support of many different organizations: Maryland Department of Health, National Alliance Mental Illness, Maryland Psychology Association, School Psychologists, Kennedy Krieger, Parent Advocacy Consortium, BANSELF, on and on. Most of the favorable with amendments that you'll see in your letters, I have had conversations with them, and mostly they are being suggested because there's a misunderstanding about the scope of this bill. I am in agreement with so many of those suggestions, but I do not believe this is a good vehicle for those. So I'm happy to take questions and turn it over to my panel.
Thank you, Delegate. The next person can begin.
Hi, my name is Catherine Carter. I am a mom of 5 and vision and health advocate. And I'm here today because I'm asking for a favorable vote because the bill creates guidelines for the current student health questionnaires that parents answer when they register their students, and allows parents to update their student health information annually because their health changes. Several school districts use these questionnaires to connect students to need in local resources, programs, and partnerships. And I think it's always best when you have a visual. So if you look in the back of my testimony, I went and gave you screenshots of what's currently happening and how it's really all over the place. And that can be very limiting. If you ask not the right questions, you won't always get the right answers. So you see the questionnaires vary greatly among the school districts in the back of my testimony, and it can result in significant inequality, and this bill allows parents to ask for help and standardizes the questions that can support the work of the Blueprint. You know, at the same time that I am asked every year to update my emergency contacts and any other information, I also will be given the opportunity as a parent to effectively update my students' health information with a standardized questionnaire developed by experts. You know, this is going to help kids like my son Atticus, who struggled for years, misdiagnosed and getting the wrong supports, or my daughter, where I couldn't really find a local provider and the school helped to connect me to one to support her IEP goals. And in addition, I want you guys to be aware, as a parent, this will empower me to not only educate the school, but educate myself as a parent, because we've all been newbies, and we don't always know what to tell the school. So it will help inform parents on what the school needs in the student file to assist the schools in providing the needed supports and services. I'm asking you to please consider this vote because we've all been parents, and we all are trying to figure it out with our kids, and giving a quality, expertly developed questionnaire can
Catherine,
not
your-
only
your
help us,
final
but our
sentence.
schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Wilkins and members of this committee. My name is Brian Pugh, representing the Brain Injury Association of Maryland. For 40 years, our organization has been providing information, assistance, education, and advocacy to address the needs of the over 120,000 Marylanders living with brain injuries and the families and healthcare providers who serve them. We are here to ask this committee to give a favorable report to HB 265. A brain injury in childhood can have lifelong consequences for both the child and their family. Symptoms and the impact of brain injury are vary based on the part of the brain injured, the severity of injury, and the age of development of the child. HB 265 seeks to provide questions to help identify students with behavioral service needs like those that can be created by a brain injury, such as cognitive impairment. Brain injuries can cause cognitive impairments like memory issues, problem solving, and attention deficit disorders. These impairments can lead to issues with daily functioning, social interaction, and academic performance. Emotional issues. Brain injuries can lead to emotional difficulties such as depression, anxiety, and difficulty regulating emotions. These emotional issues can affect behavior such as causing difficulty in social interactions and managing relationships. Impulsivity. Impulsivity can be an issue for those with brain injuries, which can lead to behaviors that are inappropriate or dangerous. It can be difficult for these individuals to control their impulses, and this can lead to further social and behavioral issues. HB 265 is a step towards ensuring that all of our children have a chance to get the behavioral services they need to become the best versions of themselves, and we ask this committee to give a favorable report to HB 265.
Thank you so much.
I hope I don't break it. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Martin Carrigan. I've been a special education teacher in Maryland for over 20 years. I also serve as the chairperson of the Maryland State Traumatic Brain Injury Advisory Board. I have a master's and postgraduate degree in special education with an emphasis on acquired brain injury. I'm here today to offer support for House Bill 265, the development and implementation of a standardized behavior health questionnaire for students. I've submitted a written testimony. I submitted it late, so you might not have gotten it yet. I have no problem sending it to everybody. That has some data and statistics in it. You can read that data, and you may already be somewhat aware of what it says. The bottom line is that students with behavioral health concerns and brain injuries are greatly underrecognized in our Maryland schools. So instead of repeating statistics that I've already submitted in written testimony, I'd like to share the stories of two different students that I've worked with in my career. The first student was a young man whom I met when I was working at a residential facility for students with emotional disturbances. This young man came to the school with a lot of difficulty regulating and controlling his emotions and behavior. He had extreme difficulties controlling himself and could best be described as all over the place. While sitting in his treatment team and reviewing his academic and medical files, I saw it documented that this young man had been riding on the back of a moped and had fallen off and hit his head. In a matter of a couple of months, the student was now in the most restrictive locked door placement in the state of Maryland. Originally, he had been living at home with his family and was going to his regular home school. This means that every placement the student went to felt they could not educate this young man. When I brought up the possibility of a brain injury being the cause of the student's difficulties, the treatment team was like, oh, and it was the first mention of the student having a brain injury in all the records other than the description of him falling off the back of the moped. The second student I would like to tell you about is a young lady who sustained several serious concussions as a middle schooler. Even though the student was diagnosed with and treated for concussions, her school was resistant to provide interventions and supports. Fortunately for this young lady, she had a fierce advocate in her mother, who happened to be a social worker. Because her mother had the proof and knowledge of the daughter's brain injury, she was able to get the right interventions and services for her daughter, who has now since gone on to college and earned a degree. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention calls traumatic brain injury the silent epidemic. It is one of the leading, if not the leading, causes of death and disability in school-aged children.
Sir, I'm sorry if you can just finish up your final sentence.
Just thank you for your time and consideration for a favorable report for House Bill 265. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who came to testify. We do appreciate it. Questions from colleagues? Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you, Delegate Guten. And since I saw somebody I'm familiar from Howard County, I want to ask a question. I used to see you a lot on school board. So Ms. Carter, one question for you. This is actually nothing new, right? You should put the recommendation together from professionals. Is that right?
One thing I've learned in Annapolis, you guys get a lot of requests for committees and commissions and stuff, and having been a member of the Strong Schools and the American Education Coalition, I thought the consortium had a large amount of those experts, so it wouldn't, and the process was already there. So it's already there, there's less work and less committees.
Great, thank you, Delegate. Any other questions? Seeing none, this ends the hearing on HB 265. And Delegate Guyton, we can start with your next bill, HB 320. And let me just get to that page. All right, I have just you in person, and then we'll have 2 people virtually that.
You? There we go. Thank you again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, still Delegate Michelle Guyton, District 42B in Baltimore County. And your day's only going to get more exciting now. So I think the chair of this committee, I heard her say that you didn't have anything too exciting in this committee this week. And I'm going to prove her right. Unless you are a real educational policy data geek like I am. So I'm very excited about this new bill, and I'll try to keep it short for those of you who are not. Thank you for your consideration of House Bill 320 to alter the definition of student data in the Maryland Longitudinal Data System. If you haven't had a briefing on this already in this committee, I'm sure you will at some point. This is the only acronym I'm going to use because it's hard to say over and over again. MLDS. MLDS stands for the Maryland Longitudinal Data System, so I can barely say it. And it's something that the members of this General Assembly, and in particular this Ways and Means Committee, should be incredibly proud of. The work that we've done in past sessions establishing and expanding the data system allows researchers to utilize encrypted and absolutely non-identified data. That's important, from 3 different state agencies: the Maryland State Department of Education, the Department of Labor, and the Maryland Higher Education Commission. And we use that, or researchers use this, although we can also, if you have a research question, so that's important to know, to develop and to evaluate the long-term effects of the policies that we put into place. And I feel like that's our responsibility. So every year, you're going to hear at least one, if not more, MLDS bills, because this was established in statute. So every time we want to add a new data point to the system, we have to do it through legislation. There's no other way. The addition to any data point has to be approved through a bill. So HB 320 simply alters the original statute to add specific student disability data to the list of student data that's collected and analyzed by the MLDS. So this is a request that came through the Maryland statewide stakeholder group on autism steering committee, a group that I work with, and they would like this so that they could help track the prevalence of autism in our school system, the diagnoses, the long-term employment and educational outcomes of this population in Maryland. Currently, MSD, Maryland State Department of Education, already reports IEP status, so whether the child is in special education or not, but they do not report the specific disability code. And this is important for the same reason as my last bill, right? If you don't know which disability a child is actually coded for within the school system, you don't know how the policies are working for that specific group, because we do look at services for kids with autism differently than we look at services for kids with ADD. So it's very important that we have that information. So statutorily adding this specific disability category will help direct policy, and it will also help other groups as well. Even though I'm bringing it forward to you as a representative for the autism stakeholder group, this will affect and help all of our kids with disabilities in the state. So thank you so much for your consideration of House Bill 320, which will help us better support our students and allocate resources appropriately. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I think I do have a few folks on Zoom.
Thank you, Delegate. We have Liz Zogby, who signed up favorable on Zoom, And I think we also have an informational testimony. Well, I guess this person is informational for questions. Liz, you can begin.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm providing this testimony today on behalf of Calvin Heddleman and myself. Mr. Heddleman is out of the country. Mr. Heddleman was a member of the Kerwin Commission, appointed by then Speaker Bush, and has been a policy analyst, advocate, and writer on special education issues. He's represented pro bono over 250 low-income students with disabilities in IEP meetings and has written numerous articles and one book on special education. I am the co-chair of the Maryland Down Syndrome Advocacy Coalition, an outreach coordinator at the Trace R&D Center at the University of Maryland that focuses on inclusive information and communication technology. Fortunately, there is at long last recognition in Maryland that the needs of students with disabilities have been severely neglected in policy, practice, and funding. The sponsor of HB 320, Delegate Guyton, has been in the forefront of efforts to bring about reform. And HB 320 commendably addresses one particular aspect, the absence of sufficient disaggregated data on students with disabilities in the Maryland longitudinal data system. Inclusion of student disability data by specific disability category is a start. The absence of such data impedes reform. Passage of HB 320 would at the same time help to focus the spotlight on the overall lack of adequate data on, for example, student performance and the cost of services. This lack of data hopefully will be part of the scope of the special education work group that the Blueprint Accountability and Implementation Board has directed the Maryland State Department of Education to create to study all aspects of special education. HB 320 could help to support that study. The sooner it is enacted and implemented, the better. Your support of HB 320 is urgently requested. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for this panel? I do believe Ross Goldstein from the Longitudinal Data System Center is on for informational to answer any questions. Is that right? Okay. Any questions? All right, Delegate Ebersol.
Here, this is an additional thing to be gathered, and the fiscal note says it shouldn't be a problem. I'm wondering if you agree with the fiscal note or if there will be a cost incurred with this.
Hi, so I'm Ross Goldstein. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center, and thank you for having me. I believe that this type of data, we already receive a lot of data from MSDE. I think that this would be able to be handled by us within the normal course of our duties. So I do not think there would be an additional fiscal note, at least for the MLDS Center. Can't speak for MSDE.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate your answer.
Thank you, Delegate. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, that concludes the hearing for HB 320. Thank you, Delegate Guyton.
Thank you so much.
All right, Chair Atterbury does have a bill that would be next, but since she's presenting in another committee, we'll come back to her when she arrives, and we'll move on to Delegate Boyce's two bills. Would you like to do 266 first or 343? Okay, how about, since I don't see him yet, how about, if it's okay with you, we take 266, and is he in the room? Your panel might not. I don't think we see anyone signed up for 266. Starting House Bill 343. Thank you, Delegate. You can proceed.
In our committee, we're not allowed to touch the mic, so I just, okay. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Regina T. Boyce of the 43rd A District, testifying on HB 343, Education Public School Athletics Basketball Schedule. For reference, this bill passed this committee in the House in 2020 as HB 1429 by then Delegate Nick Mosby. And I want to, it's a little, not so much confusing, but I want you to just bear with me with the nuance. The bill essentially extends the basketball schedule for high schoolers from 20 games to 22 games to accommodate tournament and showcase games. Each county must decide whether to authorize a team to play, but is not required to authorize a team to play, and that has to be clear. But again, this bill will allow teams to play up to 4 tournament games and a number of showcase games determined by the county board per year, including NCAA games during their evaluation period, which is the bigger issue here that I'm excited about the council president being here to expand upon. So this also includes play against teams out of state if the state has the same team equivalencies for play as those in state. And so just for reference, the NCAA evaluation periods happen in the summer or in June. And then per COMAR, school athletic teams cannot participate in any of those contests because they have to stay within the school's regulated play time. And I believe that's about a November to March. And so essentially this bill will allow, should different athletic directors and coaches want to make this expansion to play, will allow them to play, conforming them be able to play practices that have seasonal limitations, but also allows them to be on par with non-public schools and provides that competition. There are remarks that would otherwise say, look, nobody's going to essentially be the next NBA player, but I believe if no one even has the ability to compete at the same level, it creates, I think, a disadvantage and an inequity. And so we want to change that and provide this opportunity for those coaches who want those opportunities and who can provide those opportunities. So I'm hoping that this committee reevaluates this and again passes this legislation again to provide this type of equity for basketball. And I'm hope we'll also get to the point to figure out or explain why this only pertains to basketball and not any other sport in high school. Thank you so much for the time and the consideration.
Thank you, Delegate, and we're fortunate to welcome back Baltimore City Council President Nick Mosby, another former member of the Ways and Means Committee. You can proceed.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Madam Vice Chair, and to all the amazing delegates on the best committee in the House. Thank you for having me back. I'm Council President Nick Mosby, and I'm here to present on House Bill 343, Education Public School Athletics Basketball Schedule. As the amazing Delegate Regina Boyce stated, this is about equity. Nothing that Maryland did, but something that changed at the national level. So the NCAA, through infinite wisdom, changed its rules and regulations to better protect student athletes by providing NCAA-sanctioned weeks specific to public school or private school basketball teams as teams. Unfortunately, because the way COMAR was structured and some of the rules that were in the state of Maryland, our student athletes were no longer able to compete in those tournaments outside of the state of Maryland, which was outside of our traditional basketball schedule. So what this does is provides an opportunity for them to have a level of equity to not have a competitive disadvantage and be able to be showcased in front of college coaches and college programs, their talent. So what we've seen is a lot of Baltimore City and in Prince George's County public school basketball kids be forced to go to private schools or other neighboring areas so they can have these opportunities of competing from an NCAA perspective. So this committee voted this bill out unanimously, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago, and then we're just coming back asking for the same result this time. So thank you so much, Madam Vice President, and welcome back, Madam Vice Chair, and welcome back, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming to testify. Any questions, Delegate Ebersol?
I guess it's Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. She is the chair when she's here by herself. I just want to point that out to all of you, okay? So it's 20 or 22 games looks like the maximum number, and I appreciate that you're going for equity. By the way, it's a great idea. What would be the most number of games you could envision a team playing in a season if we change this regulation? It's a little hard to read through the rules, and I'm trying to sort them out here a little bit. I see 19 and I see 20 and then two other games, that kind of thing. So what would result in how many games being played perhaps if they really went all in?
So you can have a maximum of 22 regular season games. But if you elect to play in a tournament that say is 4 games, it will go up to 24 games. So you see the issue is some of the larger tournaments, like say the Beach Basketball Classic in South Carolina or some other national tournaments. Sometimes those tournaments are 4 games, meaning you have like a play-in game, you go through like quarterfinals, semifinals, and then a finals
So
game.
you get stuck because you can't get in that one because 22 is your maximum.
Well, no, you get stuck because right now the rule is you can only play 3 games in a tournament. This opens it up to 4 games. So a team that say does not play in a tournament at all, they can play up to 22 regular season games. A team that does play in a tournament, they can play 20 games with a 3-day tournament or a 4-day tournament. So to your question, the max that a team can play in the state of Maryland, if this were to pass, would be 24 games.
24. Okay. Yeah, thanks. That doesn't sound too awful. And I appreciate you're looking for equity here, and that's a good thing. Cheers.
Any other questions? Question from the chair.
Thank you, and good to see you, Mr. Council President.
Always a pleasure, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, I was in judiciary testifying. So I was talking to Delegate Boyce about this bill, and so question, so the 20, and I'm not looking at the bill, so I apologize. The bill takes it to 24 games.
Possibly.
Possibly.
If a team, and first of all,
So it's 22 games, and then you get 2 for a tournament?
no.
No.
So if you do not play in a tournament, you can have up to 22 games.
Okay.
If you play in a tournament, you can have 20 regular season games in that tournament.
And the tournament?
Yeah, some tournaments could be 2 games, 3 games, or 4 games. The max, based off this bill, is 4 games.
So you would have 20 regular season games and then 4 in a tournament?
Potentially.
Okay, because a tournament, you could have more than 4 games.
I mean, most of the tournaments are just 3 games.
Okay.
Some more exclusive ones are 4 games.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And if I could also add, most of these tournaments are by invitation only. So this would only apply to basketball teams that have traditionally done well and are on some like national scale.
And this, I'm sure you already talked about this, but this is a way for those kids who play to get seen by colleges and give them scholarship opportunities to attend and play at scholarships. So try to put them on par with like your DeMathas or your Good Counsel or these other types of schools.
Yes, to your point, Madam Chair, that's why we lose a lot of our really good student athletes to those programs because of the inequity associated with their ability to perform in front of college programs. One of the tournaments I mentioned earlier, we had a young man come present a couple years ago on this bill, and he talked about the team Baltimore Polytechnic Institute being invited to the Beach Ball Classic and how they left there with actual scholarships. One kid who is a star right now at Georgetown into that season didn't have any scholarships. He got his first scholarship based off of that tournament. Brandon Murray is his name.
I will tell you, I have 3 little people, and my oldest one is a baller. And he, in 4th grade, private schools start, talking to him about going and playing for their private high schools. And they come to where they play in these different tournaments, and they're already looking at these kids, and he's 11. And it's not even on my radar. I'm like, can we get math down? But, you know. Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, Madam Chair. So I read one clause I could try to understand, like C2. So a team may elect to play 3 games per week, twice during the basketball season. Is that like 6 games? Is that right? In total?
Yes. Yes. Is playing 3 games twice a season, 6 games, yes.
Oh, okay. The twice means maybe 2 tournaments, something. Right.
Or I think they're also inclusive of regular season games as well. So what they're saying is they don't want teams to pack the schedule. So what they ultimately don't want you to do is leave from one tournament and go to another tournament. You would just have to basically play one tournament that week.
So I think during both of your presentation, you talk about so many advantages because of basketball game, right? So why we put a limit statewide? Why not an individual school system decide that and how many they want to play?
That's a great question. That's a great question, and I definitely wanted to go further with this bill to even define tournament to the council president's point, because in some games you may not play 4 games. You may not play 3 games. It may be a 15-game tournament because the individuals in the tournament may be from all across the country. And so I think we just want to start here and see how this works, and maybe in the next couple of years come back and do exactly what you said and make it unlimited. But I'm sure there are some kind of like NCAA guidelines as well that may conflict with that ability, and those are things that I don't 100% know. But it's a great question and a great suggestion.
And Delegate Boyce is just asking for some balance. At one point, it was just wide open, and we had a top 5 team in the country back in the 90s, literally traveling around the country, and the kids weren't in school at all. And that's where they started to come up with some stricter regulations. Times have changed, and it's important to have those regulations, but we also need to change with the regulations associated with the NCAA. So that is what Delegate Boyce is attempting to do with this bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Any other questions for this panel? Delegate Muraku North.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you, colleague and City Council President, for this presentation. The opposition that I see on file, was it from the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners? Were they also in opposition the first time this bill went through committee?
No, they stayed agnostic. They stayed out of it. I think in their write-up, they kind of talked about inequities, particularly as it relates to sports. I think anyone who looks at the NCAA as it relates to sports, particularly with youth basketball, AAU, that from the regulations and the governance of it, it's a lot more, it's a very unique sport in comparison to the remainder of the sports. I think they were concerned about, why is this bill so focused on basketball? But I think the answer to that is basketball is such a unique sport as it relates to the regulations. That's why the NCAA had to put in, sanctioned weeks to allow coaches to come and watch these tournaments and participate in these tournaments. These tournaments are tied to a lot of companies like Nike and Adidas and Under Armour. There's a lot of money in these sports for particularly our amateur athletes, and that's what the NCAA wanted to kind of pull back by allowing these 2 open weeks for teams to play outside of their regular season schedule.
And Delegate, if I can add, again, enabling. It is not a mandate. And so if a school board decides, I'm Coach Boyce and I put up my schedule, they could say no. They could say no, that I can't do this. And so it really, while we're creating the kind of expansion, it's still up to the boards to make the decision of whether or not play could actually even happen. So.
And Delegate, we might be talking about 5 or 6 teams statewide that would probably be in this position to get invited to those types of tournaments. Hopefully in the future that will continue to grow because we can retain some of our student athletes, like Madam Chair's children will be one day. They can go to a great Maryland public high school. But right now what we're talking about is just a handful of schools in very targeted areas throughout the state.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other final questions for this panel? All right, that concludes the hearing on HB 343. Thank you so much for your testimony. Delegate Boyce, I know that you do have another bill before our committee, but we do need to take Delegate Atterbury's bill first.
I would not dare go before the chair.
All right.
That's like a cool rhyme.
We'll begin the hearing on HB 294, presented by Chair Atterbury. And if we can please call up Laura Alvarez, Barbara Capriaz, Rachel London, Brianna January, and Anthony Zanfordino.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I am Delegate Atterbury here on House Bill 294, and I am going to ask for your favorable request. I do that at the beginning because I usually forget by the end. So this bill, all this bill does is shift the burden of proof in a due process hearing to resolve disputes of identification, evaluation, and educational placement of children with disabilities. This committee passed an identical bill last session, but it was a local bill. It was a local Howard County bill. And unfortunately, that bill did not make it in the Senate. But it is a new day in the Senate for a lot of legislation that would come out of this committee and go to a new committee over there. And so it was interesting, when I had that bill last session, a lot of members of the committee actually came to me and said, why can't we do a statewide bill? One of them being our former vice chair, and he has cross-filed the bill across the street. And I think some other localities saw that Howard County did that, and this committee will be hearing some other local folks trying to pass similar legislation. I want to just tell a quick little anecdotal story. When I was first elected in 2014, one of the first things that I attended was a very large town hall that Ms. Croupiers probably remembers, and it was put on by former vice chair of this committee, Delegate Frank Turner, and one other person who I can't remember, and there were hundreds of parents there. And I remember listening to stories of these parents trying to advocate for their children and the needs of their children against the school system. And I remember I literally had tears coming out of my face hearing the struggles that they had. So what happens? A parent can request a due process, file a due process complaint with the Office of Administrative Hearings, and then a judge, an administrative law judge, makes a decision based on substantive grounds whether or not that child has received a free, appropriate education, which is required, as you all know, by the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The standard of proof right now that a parent has to prove, or the legal guardian of the child, is a preponderance of the evidence. So, right now, the parent or the legal guardian has to go to the Office of Administrative Hearings and prove that standard, okay? So this is an uphill and sometimes an impossible battle, particularly when we're talking about lower income families, when we're talking about families of color, when we're talking about working families, working multiple jobs, when we're talking about single parents. This is an uphill battle. This is an uphill battle with folks that I've talked to in this legislature who are perfectly capable of hiring attorneys and have children who might have special needs, and they're advocating on their behalf. And so I want to take a step back, because in your packet of information, well, it's not a packet anymore. When I first got elected, it was literally like a packet of information. But in your online, on your system, there is a 3-page letter from the Maryland State Education Association, which I usually agree with, but I think they're on the wrong side of what policy we need to be setting here in the state of Maryland for our citizens. And quite frankly and respectfully, if this was filed in the Office of Administrative Hearings, it would not meet a legal standard, because a lot of it is a lot of light and fluffy stuff saying you're hurting our feelings, okay? What this is really saying is, our people work really hard? Nobody's saying they don't. Nobody's saying that special education teachers don't work hard. Nobody's saying that they're not stressed and overworked. Nobody's saying that those issues aren't facing them today. That is a separate issue. What they say in this letter that is appropriate to comment on is on the first page. It says, the policy will result in special educators spending more time dedicated to bureaucratic administrative matters, either to anticipate and prepare for litigation, or being pulled from the classroom to attend pretrial and trial proceedings. This is already the case. This law will not change it. Regardless of who has the burden of proof, they already have to do that. That is already the case. So I don't think respectfully that that has any bearing on whether or not this committee passes this piece of legislation. And I already mentioned, you know, a lot of this, their letter says that special educators work tirelessly. We agree with that. Nobody's saying that they don't. So I will turn it over to the folks that are here to testify in support, some in support with amendment, and I appreciate them coming. And I want to say for the record that I appreciate Delegate Griffith's passion on the issue and partnering with me on this issue. And look at that bipartisanship at work right here. Thank you very much, and I ask for your favorable support.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next person can begin.
Hi, Madam Vice Chair, Madam Chair, thank you. I'm Rachel London, the Executive Director of the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council. We're a statewide public policy organization that creates change to make it possible for people with developmental disabilities to live the lives they want with the support they need. You have my testimony as favorable with amendments. The amendment merely to make sure that this change does apply to all cases. Hopefully a very friendly amendment. But I want to just add 3 things to Madam Chair's testimony. First, families that have kids with disabilities are actually live in higher rates of poverty, disproportionately higher rates than poverty, which means they have less access to those attorneys and to the experts needed in the cases. Schools have all those things, right? So switching the burden does in fact make sense. Second, about on average, 20 due process cases are heard a year. 20, that's it, throughout Maryland. We have 110,000 students with IEPs in the state of Maryland, 20 cases. In fact, in the last 5 years, there were only 92. And parents only won 24 of those 92, the vast majority being before fiscal year 20, when our colleagues and partners actually went out and trained all of the administrative law judges. 3 neuropsychologists from Kenny Krieger went out and trained. And then there was a little bit of a switch to seeing more parents win those cases. It went from an average of 19 to an average of 30. Parents who represent themselves have won 0 cases. So again, this makes sense. You have my written testimony, and I appreciate your time.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and to the entire House Committee for Ways and Means. My name is Anthony Zanfordino. I'm presenting on behalf of the ARC of Maryland, and more importantly, my son, Stormy Zanfordino, who is a 16-year-old with Down syndrome. I would encourage the committee to pass this bill. We did ask for an amendment of exclusion of the unilateral provision, and I can talk about that a little bit more. Why? So let me start by saying this. Parents who have an IEP ask for prayers and guidance when they go into that meeting. This is, when things get tough, they ask for an advocate, right? Now, this is supposed to be a meeting about our child's education, and we're sitting here asking for prayers because we know the rough road, right? And the emotional part that we all go through. So let me talk a little bit about my son. When he first entered school, you know, we started with infants and toddlers because we live in Prince George's County. And, you know, he got to kindergarten and things were going okay, we thought. By the time he got to 3rd grade, all of a sudden the school system switched on us. They wanted to make sure he didn't graduate with a diploma, but he got a certificate for just showing up. We had multiple meetings with the school special special education group. And even the coordinator said, I know you don't agree with them and you should file, right? She didn't say that in the room, but she said that outside. His third grade teacher said, as he handed me the paper, he said, kids like this may not learn. So as a parent, I walk away defeated. And you hear the stories about other parents. At the time, one of my good friends was the assistant superintendent of Prince George's County Schools. And I could have picked up the phone and said, hey, I need a favor, but I didn't. I walked away, and I'm ashamed to say, because I didn't want to go through the fight. Because having a child with special needs is very difficult and challenging. There's moments I cry because of it. But let me finish by saying this. My son right now is in 11th grade at Bishop McNamara. We gave up on the IEP. And he now has a chance to learn, participate in inclusion, because since 2020 was the first time he'd ever been in a class with typical peers. So when I ask that we put the due process onto the school system.
I'm sorry, sir, we do have to ask you to finish your last sentence.
Okay. So again, I just ask for your approval of this bill.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story and your advocacy. Next person can begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm Barb Croupiars, and my son with a disability is currently in college studying to be a special education teacher. Shifting the burden to schools means schools have to present their evidence first. And if a judge believes it's a tie, the decision goes to the parent. That's it. Schools have to prepare their cases anyway, as Delegate Atterbury said. If parents can't afford an attorney and have to go first and don't know how to present evidence or cross-examine a witness, the case can be thrown out. Special ed parents can't appeal decisions to their boards of ed like their general ed counterparts due to the legal nature of special ed. They can write a state complaint, wait 60 days for MSDE to investigate. If MSDE finds violations, they wait several more months for the mandated corrections by MSDE's deadline. If the corrections are not done, MSDE still does not consider it out of compliance until a whole year after their finding. In 2019, Prince George's County had 22 cases with violations, and 21 of them had no corrective actions begun more than a year after MSDE's findings. That's a long time to wait for a child's legal rights to be upheld. Parents know when their kids are regressing, but they don't always know why. They're told by the IEP teams that the IEP is being followed, even when that's not true. Schools have all the data. Parents aren't in the classroom or provided feedback to know what's going wrong. Sometimes teachers aren't even aware there's an IEP, or they don't have the time to follow the IEP because their caseloads are too large. But that means this legal contract is not being followed. Shifting the burden to schools is a very minor change, but it's the right thing to do. As the New Hampshire governor said as he signed a similar bill in 2020, it really does what we always talked about, putting the individual first, putting the kids first, putting families first. Teachers may be leaving the profession because they aren't getting the training and supports that they need to be successful, not because the 9 cases per year that go to courts, in the 9 cases that go to court, schools might have to go first instead of second. And I urge a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person can begin. You may have to switch seats.
It's okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
My voice tends to travel. This is my first time doing this. So I immigrated here when I was 5 years old from Guatemala. And I'm so excited, but then I am actually upset too, because I'm here so you can see me. I'm an immigrant of this country. I believe in the system. And I have a 14-year-old with autism. I grew up in Prince George's County. I work in my community. I am a product of this country and the best thing it has to offer. But when it has come down to the education of my child, we are at impasse. So here's the facts of the case so you know. He was diagnosed with autism, dyslexia at the age of 7. We've been in the Prince George's County school system since he was 5. I did not get the benefit of informing myself of the infants and toddlers program. So my husband and I have just been fumbling around trying to get resources from him. When he started the school system, we thought the IEP program would help him. It has not. We're $15,000 in debt. I am not a six-figure salary person. We're just not. I literally had to ask for time off to come here because it's so important to me. I'm asking you to please, please approve this bill for my community, for the people who can't speak the language. And it's so hard to sit in these IEP meetings being thrown the book at you and not understanding. So thank God for my lawyer team, thank God for my advocate. We are moving forward, but we by no means are at that point, and we're trying to figure out whether we move or forward or we just give up.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your time and sacrifice of being here today. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you, thank you.
I believe we've heard from all of the witnesses, and I'll actually ask the first question. Mr. Zanfordino, I know you mentioned something about unilateral provision. I don't think you had the time to explain it, so if you can share a little bit more about that.
Sure, and I forget the exact place where it is, but it basically says if you decide to take your child out of the school system, you would not be reimbursed.
Right.
So in my case, I've already made that decision to take them out of the school system at a cost of $20,000 a year to me. But it's the best decision that I've ever made, right? And those that know my son and have seen my son on his way to school know that that was the right decision.
Thank you, sir. Madam Chair, you wanted to add?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, I just wanted to point out on page 4 of the bill, in line 13, so it states that if a student would otherwise be required to enroll in a public school in a county, but a parent unilaterally makes a decision to place the child elsewhere, so without consulting the school, then they would not be entitled to reimbursement. That's the section he's talking about.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I saw next Delegate Griffith, then Delegate Vogel, Delegate Charles. Okay, we have quite a line here, but go ahead, Delegate Griffith.
Might be too many mics on.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair, for bringing this bill forward, and thanks for all the folks who submitted testimony. Mr. Zanfordino, did I get that right?
Yes.
All right. I, too, am a father of an autistic child, 8.5-year-old, infants and toddlers, IEP meetings, and nothing in my life creates more anxiety than that IEP meeting. Next to the infants and toddlers meeting when they tell you your son has autism, right? So I certainly understand the overwhelmingly hopeless feeling sometimes these meetings can bring. Not always, but when they're bad, they're bad. And I've been blessed to be in a position to advocate for my son, but we know for every one of me, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of folks who aren't in the position to advocate for themselves, or even the ones who can, again, are hilariously outnumbered with teams of experts and data and educated individuals up against somebody who is just, a single mom, barely making it, trying to make sure their son can be all they can become, right? If this bill would have been passed, obviously, your son's in a different situation, moved on, but to put yourself back in the shoes of yourself at that time when you had to make that decision to take your kid out of school, how would it have changed the equation for you?
In my case in particular, we just felt the school was not doing enough, even with the IEP, right? Because the focus, when they put you on the life skills track, is just that, life skills. It's not about the education of the child, it's about life skills. And we thought my son deserved more, and even as teachers. So when we took him out of public school and we put him into a special program at Bishop Mack, his 8th grade teacher at the time actually wrote one of his recommendations to go to that school. But you know, as I look back in the beginning years, and I wholeheartedly agree with what you say, is the fundamentals of advocating for your child, especially early on, is you're still dealing with the diagnosis of your child. And you really don't understand what an IEP means and how it potentially impacts your life. And the school systems, in a way, know that because they go through that process over and over again. You're just a number. And to myself, when I look back, I should have fought that fight because that's the type of person I am, and pushed harder for the school system, which my son goes to actually change, to be more inclusive of kids with special needs, to be a part of not only going to these special schools where, you know, you're taking an hour bus ride, but to go to your local schools, to be a part of that local community that you know, you grow up in. So in retrospect, I definitely would have pushed myself harder to fight that fight. And my wife said we should, and I said, you know what? I already know how they feel, so let's just find a better place.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I just have 2 more questions for Ms. London. Couple quick questions. So in this bill, does it say anywhere in the bill that it requires the public schools to do additional recording of data?
Absolutely not. And in fact, they already have to do a lot of reporting and data collection because the IDEA requires it for those students with disabilities. This is not requiring anything additional.
Does the bill require teachers, special educators to do anything additional in this bill?
No.
So my final question, and thank you for the opportunity, Madam Vice Chair. My final question is, you know, there's a lot of times we debate issues, we disagree on issues, we agree on issues, and I typically can always understand where someone's coming from, and even if I disagree, I understand where they're coming from. The folks in opposition to this bill were saying this will create a tremendous amount more work for special educators. What I'm trying to find out is, first and foremost, does that mean that we're not doing a good enough job now that would require them to do that? And secondly, would that mandate come from the superintendent's board of education, not from this bill?
So there's been a lot of research since other states have passed similar bills, switching the burden to the school systems. And in those other states, and generally people reference New Jersey, New York, so that's the example I'm going to use, is that research has showed there's been no additional administrative work, no additional administrative burden. In fact, if the school systems are doing what they're supposed to do, and we believe they are for the most part in terms of documentation of IEPs and the data necessary to create those IEPs under the IDEA, there should be no additional work necessary.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Delegate Vogel.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair, for this bill. I just want to echo your comments from earlier that special educators do remarkable work in our communities, and I think we're all grateful for the work they do. I just want to better understand how this bill would affect the practice of this IEP process, right? So my understanding right now is that the Office of Administrative Hearings appoints a judge in these cases. So this bill would shift, you know, the legal nature of due process, but in practice, right, parents, assuming that you don't have a lawyer, right? Ideally, you have a lawyer, but if you don't, you're still up against, you know, the odds, right, of having a school system that has lawyers and professionals who are able to work on this versus you, right? So how would this help you all have greater access to lawyers, or is that something that we're going to have to work on in the future?
Well, I'll just briefly make a comment. We've had over the years bills that would provide access to lawyers and certain funds and appropriations. So I do think that's a separate issue, and that would be for a variety of cases, civil cases, domestic violence cases, this type of situation. So I think that is still going to be an issue. I think for me, from a legal perspective, you know, for a parent to go in and think, what does a preponderance of the evidence mean? What actually does that mean? Then you have to think, what do I have to prove in court to meet that burden? While at the same time, I'm trying to research and understand that, I'm trying to figure out, you know, do I need to respond to some requests for documents or interrogatories, questions? You know, so all of that, I think, is a huge uphill battle for anyone who's not an attorney. I did trial work for like 13 years of my life, and I saw folks come in that were trying to represent themselves in cases, and they don't know the rules of evidence, and it's a constant trip up. And then, you know, you face the risk of having your claim dismissed because you're not abiding by the rules. I was a great trial attorney, and I will tell you that if I'd say, you know what, they're not meeting the standard, they're not meeting the rules, dismiss this. And that would be the same case here. And so I think this just gives more of a fair shot to parents or the legal guardian. And I personally just believe that that is the policy that we should be making as a state.
I just have one quick question on your comments from earlier regarding language barriers, right? Are the judges that are hearing these cases, are they able to work, based on your experience or based on what we know of these judges and hearings as a whole, are they able to work in Spanish? Are they able to work with parents who might not have, or do they have translators?
Well, for some, I haven't gotten to the lawyer, the judge part, but in my experience, I also worked as advocacy for other families. And I could tell you in my experience, just that educational piece that you have to, not only do you have to educate yourself for what it means to have a kid with special needs, you also have to educate yourself on how to navigate the IEP process. Let me not just go back and say, since my son started the school system in Prince George's County, I have been there to try to educate myself. It is not likely that I've had to hire lawyers and an advocate. It's just gotten to this point. And to specifically answer your question, it is 10 times, if not harder, for someone who does not know the language. I know the language, and I can't figure it out. I've had to hire a lawyer and an advocate to help me do the due process, fight the right processing, get my words right. I'm a parent of a mother with a special needs child. I just want him to get the education that he deserves. How we get there, I leave it in your hands. I'm just asking you to make this a little easier. And for those that don't speak the language.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Charles.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to first start off by thanking our chair for bringing this bill. As a father of a child with an IEP, I can truly understand a lot of these issues, dealing with these long meetings, not understanding. I sit in a committee that has oversight over these education issues, and I can barely understand half of the stuff they're talking about in these IEP meetings. So we had to get an education advocate. And those things are hard to come by. It's a cost associated with it. And Mr. Zanfordino, sorry, brother, Zanfordino, you mentioned something earlier, and I wanted to get a little bit more perspective on it, how you pulled your kid out of the public school and put him in private school, because I had the opposite. I had
we had our son in a private school, and they did not provide any type of services, no IEP services within the private school setting. And so we had to pull him out and put him into the public school and then go through all of these IEP issues that we're currently dealing with now. How did you get your child into a private school that has those types of services?
So in a particular program at Bishop McNamara, right? So I don't know how it is at other schools. They specifically will take children with special needs, and they look at their IEP. So yes, the more complicated and complex the IEP is, the less likely they are to want to deal with it. What they look at is individuals who have the ability to learn, the ability to socially and emotionally connect to their typical peers. So in essence, we didn't look at the IEP because even in the IEP, they just go over some of the basics. In the program that he is in now, for example, last year he was part of the yearbook committee, right? Typically, that would not happen in a public school. This year, he's taken documentary film. Those type of things do not happen under the normal special education program. The other things is even participation in sports. He's on the swim team at McNamara. If those of you that get the local NBC4 will see Megan McGrath did a story on him last week for the plunge. He's also going to be on the golf team when the season kicks off. So for us, we actually didn't lose anything because McNamara was prepared to give him the basics of what he needed. Now, of course, if he had a more challenging IEP, that may, not have been the best example. But for our particular case, it worked. And in their program, they have 2 students right now, and we're hoping to recruit more.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm going to leave this on. All right, thank you so much, Delegate. We will now go to Delegate Eversole and then Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sing a song? There we go. So I just want to clarify something, and I think this question would go to Rachel London probably just for clarification. It was said that if a student was unilaterally placed outside of a school, that you would have to pay for it. That's not true, although many would say that would probably be the result anyway. At least we know that it just shifts the burden of proof back to the parent in that case. Is that accurate?
So unilateral placement in general means that the parent outside of the IEP team decided to remove their child from the public school system and either started paying for them to either go to a private school or a non-public special education school. As written, this bill would switch the burden of proof for every case except if a parent decided to place their child on their own decision without the IEP team in one of those placements. What we are suggesting, what I heard the ARC suggest, and what certainly the DD Council is suggesting, I think is a friendly amendment, is that in fact the burden should shift in every case, including those unilateral placements.
But as written, it wouldn't be automatic that a parent would have to pay for that. They could go through due process. They just have the burden of proof the way the bill's written now.
Absolutely. Okay. In all cases, regardless of what a parent brings up, from the chairs started at the beginning by saying identification or services and supports through an IEP or placement.
I'm sorry.
You have to go through that process.
I just thought I heard someone say the parent has to pay. And I was just clarifying.
May or may not.
Whether or not, with that as it's written now, and your contention is, of course, that burden of proof should shift there as well.
Yes.
Fair enough, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Any other questions for this panel? Delegate Wu.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So first I want to thank you, our Madam Chair, to bring forward this bill. I think as we had a discussion before, Howard County is actually leading the effort. So I want to recognize one individual from the panelists, Mr. Krupiaz. Always have difficulty pronouncing your last name. And for your many years' effort to advocating for special education in Howard County. Thank you very much for that.
Isn't that so?
I heard in my head too.
All right.
Process with Senator Montgomery in 2013, and when she retired, I promised that I would continue the fight, and I'm still here fighting, so thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that fight. Thank you to this panel. Unless there are any final questions. All right. Thank you so much. We now do have a panel of unfavorable witnesses who can go ahead and come on up when your name is called. I have Nicole Disney Bates, Edward Kitlowski, Samantha Zwirling, John Woolhams, and then the rest are virtual. And for those who are virtual, the way that this will work in committee is that once all of the in-person individuals finish testifying, we will go ahead with the favorable folks who are virtual and then the unfavorable. So thank you so much for your patience if you are on Zoom. All right, anyone can go ahead and begin.
Okay, I'll start. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Samantha Zwirling, and I'm here representing MSCA, representing 75,000 educators across the state of Maryland, and we are here to respectfully oppose HB 294. We absolutely understand the intent and have the same goal here to serve our special education students. But we are concerned with this bill, and I think from the previous testimony, just disagree on how this will actually be implemented. In a time of great shortage and with excessive workload issues, which are burning out our educators and furthering the shortage, we believe that this bill will add to that. We've already heard a lot about the educator shortage, but the #1 shortage area is special education, with 447 vacancies during the 2021-2022 school year. There's already, as has been referenced, a great paperwork divide between general educators and special educators. And I know folks contend that this will not add to that, but we disagree. If there's a presumption essentially that special educators are not providing the appropriate services, there's going to be an increase in paperwork and in having to prove that they are actually providing these services. We worry on that note that this will reduce informal communication between educators and families. If a special educator always feels that they need to prove that they are doing the job, they'll want everything documented in writing, potentially reducing phone calls and other informal communication between parents and families. Again, we want to support our special education students, and nobody here, I think, will tell you that the IEP process is easy for anybody. With the federal government only funding IDEA at a fraction of what they should be, it puts a strain on everyone from state government on down to the educators and the students themselves. So we want to work with this committee to find a better solution. We just don't think that this bill is the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Edward Kitlowski, and I was a special ed teacher in Baltimore County Public Schools for over 30 years. I was an IEP chairman. I also worked at Howard Community College, Project Access, and I worked as a parent advocate. I've also worked as a parent advocate and was the co-chair of the impact on what No Child Left Behind would have on the state of Maryland. So, you know, I understand everything that everybody was saying that was in favor. I'm going to give like 2 areas where I disagree with this. The first is philosophical, because there's a Supreme Court case in which the Senator Day O'Connor said, "We hold that the burden lies, as it typically does, on the party seeking relief. You know, our Constitution, our government, our democracy is based on you are innocent until proven guilty." And as much as I agree with everything everybody was saying in favor of this, I don't think that the answer is to change our philosophy of democracy. You know, there is due process. Now, as a teacher, a special ed teacher, IEP, it's the last few years of my teaching, the paperwork was just exponentially. I mean, I even had a department chairman say, "Oh, you have paperwork? I'll take you out. I'll get a substitute teacher. Would you want a substitute teacher in the class, or would you want somebody who has a master's degree plus 30 in that classroom? So I'm more than willing to illuminate on some of the, how is this going to be extra paperwork? There are federal constraints also that affect us. So as much as I think that special ed needs to be fixed, I don't think that this is the solution.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Nicole Disney Bates, and I'm currently the TAC president at an MSCA affiliate in Anne Arundel County. I say currently because for the past 11 years, I was and am a special educator in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I love being a special educator. It's a job that takes flexibility, creativity, passion, understanding, and true, honest grit. It's not a job for all, and that's why some say special educators are heroes or angels. If you have those qualities, then you might be a good candidate to become a special educator. These are the qualities that I like to believe that I have when I envision my job as a special educator. I thought these qualities would be of great use when working with students with, quote, low incidence disabilities. My first job was in a functional life skills class. This is a class for students who are on their path to earn their high school certificate. I loved this job. I love providing my students with a means of communication. I love going out in the community for community-based instruction. I love providing life skills instruction and academic instruction. If you can't tell, I loved this job. I loved my students. I loved the work I did. I even loved collecting data. Anyone who's worked with me will tell you all about my data binders. I even became a decent hand at writing IEPs. However, as time went on, things began to change. I decided after 3 years I was going to try my hand at becoming a special educator in elementary school. This is when the expectations of IEP writing became more and more rigid and took me away from my students. First, we could not standardize sections of the IEP across students. Then more alignment of our goals with our present levels, with our accommodations and modifications, more data, more tracking, more transition plans, more and more. When I started in elementary, I would attend professional developments with other special educators. My first year, I went in the fall and the spring. Then the second year, I went in the fall and the spring and knew less faces. By my 5th year, I knew basically no one. Why? Because they left. They went to general education, they quit, or they left the county. And they left our new special educators with no veteran to guide them. I understand the intent of the bill is to switch the burden of proof to the education systems, that there will be additional resources to parents beyond the accountability of today, where an average IEP takes about 5 hours to write. The question is at what cost? That's what I ask you today. How many more special educators are going to ask?
Could you wrap up, please?
Yep.
Thank you.
Should I provide service to my students or do paperwork?
Thank you. Mr. Willems?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Willems, representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, here today testifying in opposition to House Bill 294. I've been before this committee many times on issues of special education services and the rights and responsibilities of the school system and of parents. This committee has passed laudable legislation to expand the parental consent provisions related to issues like alternative placement, alternative assessment, non-diploma track programs for students, any use of restraint included in the IEP. So we've gone beyond federal law in that regard. This committee commissioned a study in 2018 that was completed in 2019 that concluded that Maryland exceeding federal law in terms of meeting the needs of parents in the area of special education goes to these issues of clarity, goes to these issues of translation of materials and the use of plain language in materials that local school systems provide and in the materials that MSDE provides. So we're doing really well on behalf of those 110,000 students that were referenced earlier. Is it a perfect process? No. One of the strongest areas of failing, if that makes sense, is the lack of highly qualified staff. And we are supporting other initiatives this session to help pull down more Medicaid funding. We love the Grow Your Own program under the Maryland Leads grants that are funded through the federal ESSER funding to encourage students to go into education, special education, related health and services, get enrolled in community college programs, move into 4-year programs and serve these students who need these services most. shifting the burden of proof. We appreciate the clarity in the bill that it would not apply to unilateral placements and is not intended to increase paperwork, but we believe it would and would work against the optimal investment of the limited funds we have to serve our special education students now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the committee? Delegate Griffith.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for testifying and showing up. This question is for Mr. Willems, or I'm so sorry I did not get your name.
Samantha Zwirling.
Smith.
You can call me Sam Z, also works.
Sam Z, got it. I guess my first question is, for an IEP evaluation, especially when it raises to the level of dispute, how many individuals representing the schools are involved in the process, soup to nuts, from experts, attorneys, staff, faculty, the whole works, administrators?
I don't know the answer to that.
Usually teachers, both special and general education, will be there. The IEP chairperson, sometimes the school psychologist will be there. And yes, generally a lawyer from the school system.
What about once it rises to the level of a dispute? Because that's it for the IEP evaluation.
Well, if at the level of a dispute, it would just be outside of the school system. I mean, the school itself. It would probably the same amount of people would be going to wherever the hearing was taking place.
And what about support staff for those individuals? Pulling data, compiling reports, researching, things of that nature.
I'm not clear. Are you asking, would they be going to the hearing?
Involved in the process.
Right. Well, they're obviously going to be part of the process because they're in the school and they're going to be contributing to whatever's happening. So they may or may not be called to go to the hearing.
Sure. So 10, 15 people potentially somehow touching this process, college educated, well-funded, experts with attorneys backing them, facing a low-income parent, you know, at or below the poverty line.
I get your point. And that's why at one point when I was an IEP chair, there was a case where a parent was challenging. They were really asking for something that, and the lawyer for the attorney for Baltimore County Public Schools just said, okay, well, just give her what she wants. And I was like, why? And it's like, because it's, wait, let me finish. You asked a question.
I did.
Okay.
So she...
Please, sir. Sir, stop speaking. The delegate can go ahead and speak. Stop speaking.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I was trying to drill down to the specific. So, but you're not disputing my assessment of how many people may be involved in the process that a parent would be facing. Okay. Yeah. And anybody can answer this. So, in the physical note, it breaks down in pretty good detail that in the 2 states that have passed this, there are 7 states passed this, but it really cites the 2 states, New Jersey and New York. And it talks about after a small initial increase in disputes, they've seen a steady, continual decline in these cases. And they've not seen any increase in workload for teachers in those states. So I guess my question, and this is the assertion by you, Ms. Sam Z. Obviously, we're talking about things that are evidence-based. What evidence do we have to support the assertion that this would increase the workload of teachers?
Well, I think, first of all, as you mentioned, in those other states, there is an initial uptick in the cases. And so we are in a crisis shortage situation right now. And so we worry what the impact will be of pushing people out of the profession right now in these times. And kind of what we were talking about earlier around the identification of these students, like many times that identification can happen when somebody is in a general education situation. And so that can also bring in other folks in the building into these cases that they're out for these disputes. But I think it is our belief that even though the number of cases wouldn't equate to the increased workload because if there is an assumption that the school system is always going to have to defend itself on every single student that has an IEP, that there is going to be a lot more rigorous.
So we have no evidence, just an assumption And that's only if it's mandated by the school system.
If what is mandated by the school?
Extra work.
I mean, I think every educator, if they know that they are going to have, if there's a presumption essentially that they are not doing their jobs, that they are going to then be increasing their tracking and workload. I mean,
But that would be a choice. Then there's no mandate in here. There's nothing happening. That's just an assumption. And I think I agree with the panel. I think the vast majority of these cases, the special educators are doing a great job. So I think the majority of special educators, there should be no net effect, except for the ones maybe not doing a good enough job. Those are few and far between, because I think generally we have a good system. Do we generally feel that this bill would help level the playing field? Even if this passes, it's still significantly in the favor of the schools because of the experts and the number of folks and the experience. Do you feel this would help level the playing field for folks trying to advocate for their children?
Is that to me specifically?
You and Mr. Williams.
If I could, I think one of the facets of special education to really emphasize is that the intent under federal law and under Maryland's law is the opposite of leveling the playing field. It's to provide a significant advantage and a significant quantum of increased services to students identified as eligible for special education services. So we're investing some factor of 10 more time and resources. That group of professionals that you described, Delegate, that speech language pathologist is not an attorney and doesn't have one by his or her side on a regular basis. They have a heavy caseload. We have a shortage of these folks. We have a shortage of school psychologists. And we need these folks to comply with the federal law and to comply with the state law. So it's not about leveling the playing field. I know what you're talking about in terms of burden of proof, but really the intent and the legal obligation is to provide vastly more services to special education students than non-special education students.
And my final question is to follow up the last one, and thank you very much for the time, Madam Chair. I'm trying to walk in the shoes of the most vulnerable, right? Not me, not you. I look at, again, particularly the situations I've dealt with in my district, the single mom who's right about the poverty line, who didn't even know what autism was until they were thrust into this situation, and now they're trying to handle it and deal with it. And they're doing their very honest best. And the school is saying that they're getting all the services they deserve or entitled to, and the parents are like, well, my kid's not progressing, or regressing, or having some issue, and now they're at the level of dispute, right? That's where the playing field, that is the field, right? That is the field of play, right? And I'm trying to, as the mom, I'm trying to do my very best to figure this out, facing a team, a full baseball team worth of experts versus me. So in that scenario, would this help, at least very slightly? It's still overwhelmingly in the favor of the school because of the expertise and the number of people and the attorneys. Would this at least slightly help level the playing field for the parent, yes or no?
I think what would be great.
I believe the answer is yes, relative to the burden of production and persuasion that the school system would have to produce in that due process hearing. The going first example or kind of metaphor that's often used to describe this situation. And so I don't know that it's a different amount of information that would have to be provided, but I do believe that burden at that moment does have a kind of trickle back or wash back effect on everything else we do, which is one of the concerns we have with the legislation.
Again, I very much appreciate it. I know everybody on the panel is very good intention and wants the right thing, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
If this question was asked earlier, I had to step out for my own bill hearing in another committee. And this might be a question for you, John. Is there data on how many cases get to this level of dispute statewide and what the outcomes are?
Actually, Rachel London, who testified previously, gave us that data, and we can give it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions from the committee? Delegate Patterson.
Thank you very much. This is just a quick question. My questioning really follows pretty much Delegate Griffiths. Earlier in the session, we heard testimony of ombudsmen and their roles. And for my personal relationship with my constituents, I'm often presented with the concern of parents who do not understand the IEP. Regardless of their education, they simply need help. And so when I look at the bill that's presented here, I'm thinking, is this a quasi-ombudsman opportunity? And if not, then what are we doing in terms of helping the parents? And full disclosure, my son is a special ed teacher who's an angel, loves his job. But most of all, we want to make sure that the parents, as well as the students, are getting the very best process and service. And the question is probably for John or for Sam.
Yeah, I'll start and then John can go. But, this committee did look at this issue that you're talking about. In 2020, you all passed a bill to create a special education ombudsman in the Office of the Attorney General. And so that was passed in the 2020 session. We've actually been really trying to get a hold of the Office of Attorney General's office to find out if that if they are following the bill that you all passed. I've had some conversations with members of this committee about can we create more of these positions in counties to help folks through this process. Again, I think that we're all on the same page of wanting to help parents and help students get through this process. So, John, I don't know if you have more to add.
Delegate Patterson, I would just add that there are pretty strict guidelines federally and certainly at the state level for how much information we have to provide and how clear we have to be in plain language. And so if you go to your local school system's website and look at the special education section and look at the information that's provided, it should be a rather impressive amount of fairly detailed information about the process, the rights. There are frequently asked questions, and that's certainly true at MSDE as well. And MSDE has a staff that you can call that is not limited to an enforcement compliance role, but they also provide general information to parents and families for the process. Is it confusing? Is it full of acronyms? Absolutely. And is it daunting to parents? Yes. And we have a lot of professionals. I mean, you're looking at, again, psychology, speech-language pathology, a lot of complicated health and psychological services. But the process itself needs to be made very clear, very transparent for parents, and we believe we're doing a good job of that in Maryland because we're not only meeting the federal minimum standards, but we're going beyond those standards.
I think your suggestion of an ombudsman, why not create like a center where people can go and get information and get help, like on a personal basis. I give my time to parents who have issues with special ed, and I do it freely because I truly believe that special ed is needed. That's why I stayed in it for over 30 years.
Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to just add a little perspective with a question here. We talk a lot about burden of proof in providing services, but would it also be true that in establishing what is the disability, what level the disability is, and what services are required, that would also be a circumstance in which there could be due process hearings, is that right? So yes. That's a little trickier because if a parent just declares that their child has autism, it would then fall to the school to prove that they didn't, when it would be proving a negative there in that case. Okay, I just want to know, if John, does that sound about right in that situation?
Yes, in terms of the initial assessment and identification of the student based on one of the federally recognized disabilities, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I'll just mention that we hear that a lot from our members who talk about parents who want additional services for their students, and we can understand that, but they don't test into those services or into that kind of medical situation. And so there can be then a dispute on the identification, and so that then creates a dispute like you're talking about between the school system and the educators and some of the professionals who are saying, this is what we're seeing and this is how this child is testing, and a parent might just have a different belief on that.
Any other questions from the committee? I have a couple follow-up questions. So based on what Delegate Eversole asked, so his question said a parent could just declare that their child has autism, and Mr. Williams agreed, but isn't the process that first there would be mediation would have to happen prior to going to the due process process?
Yes, Madam Chair, that is absolutely true.
Okay, and then if you got through mediation, hypothetically, and you move forward and you're actually in a court, there would have to be evidence presented in the OAH because you are in front of an administrative law judge. So certainly the local school board would have an attorney at its disposal to show or disprove using the proper burden of proof that that child does or does not have autism. Is that how the process would work?
Yes.
Okay. And just so we're clear, I know I mentioned it, what is the burden of proof when you go into the Office of Administrative Hearings? What is it? Right now, what is the burden of proof? What is the legal standard?
So the parents, the complainant would have to show by preponderance of the evidence that the school system was not providing FAPE, the free and appropriate public education, in the least restrictive environment. And then there are many kind of detailed layers below, under that with regard to the provision of specific educational services, placement, and the like.
So you said preponderance of the evidence. So what does that mean when you go into your administrative hearings? What does that mean you have to show?
It's often described as, a needle that's right in the middle of the gauge. And do you have the burden of tipping that needle, 1 degree past halfway?
So you're an attorney, correct?
Yes.
So you know this. So I'm also an attorney, and I would say more specifically, it's more likely than not, a little over 50%. But is it fair to say that someone who is not an attorney and who is a parent or a legal guardian would not know that that's the burden of proof, that that's the actual legal standard that you would have to show when you go into the Office of Administrative Hearings?
Madam Chair, I believe that depends very much on a case-by-case basis as to how much information that parent has received from the school system and from other advocates.
Okay,
so I would find it highly unlikely that a parent finds themselves before the Office of Administrative Hearings in a due process hearing without having any baseline understanding of what the
It's your
burden is.
contention that parents who go before the Office of Administrative Hearings in this situation understands that the words preponderance of the evidence means that they have to show that it is more likely than not, in your words, tipping the needle, in my words, a little over 50%. You think parents would know that? That's your contention?
In most cases, yes.
Okay, I will respectfully disagree with you on that. You're an attorney, so I think you know that. Can you tell me what the reporting requirements are currently for special education teachers under the IDA? What do they have to report? Because there's been a lot of talk about there will be increased work. So what is it right now that they have to do?
It depends on if you are managing a student that you don't actually teach, which happens quite frequently. There are quarterly reports that have to be done. There is intermittent testing that has to be completed. And if you're not teaching one of the students that you're managing, then you have to find a way of getting the information from them. There are triennial educational assessments that have to be completed for each person that you case manage. There's at least one, possibly more IEP teams for each student that you case manage.
So right now that's being done because, is it correct that that's required by the federal government? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And there may be additional in different systems. I know Baltimore County created additional reports that we had to manage.
So it's that information, should there be a hearing in front of OAH, then that information is relied upon by the school system. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, yes.
So if the burden of proof is shifted, will that same information be required of the school system and of the teachers, special educations to do?
Probably.
Yes.
That'd probably be additional, though.
Does this, have you read the legislation that's proposed? Okay. Is there any language in the legislation that says that there is an additional burden on the teachers to provide above and beyond what is currently required by the federal government?
No, but
Okay. So this legislation then does not specifically say that there's an additional requirement of reporting of any kind. Is that accurate?
that's accurate.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from this committee? Okay, thank you very much for coming in today to testify. We do have some people virtually that are hopefully still with us. And I will just check with our wonderful clerk Omar here. We have Danielle Leclerc, Leslie Margolis, and Nathan Farrell. So we will start with Danielle Leclerc. Thank you for waiting. And whenever you're ready.
Thank you all so much for having me. Can you hear me at the committee?
Yes.
Great, thank you. My name is Danielle Leclerc, and my wonderful daughter Patience and I know it's hard to see on screen, but there she is with her birthday last month. We live in University Park, Maryland. We became a family 5 years ago when I adopted Patience from foster care. I am testifying completely in support of HB 294. We keep hearing the Moore Miller administration say their motto is leave no one behind. I am here to tell you that in Maryland, in the last 5 years, I've been my daughter's mom. Maryland has completely left kids like mine who have disabilities way behind. Patience is a really smart kid and she really wants to learn. She has a lot of disabilities that challenge her ability to learn in school. She has PTSD, she has a traumatic brain injury, and she has a number of developmental and learning disabilities from the abuse and neglect that she suffered in her birth and her foster homes before I adopted her. Right now, and I appreciate others saying this, it's been me by myself. I'm a single mom. I adopted her from foster care as a single mom. So I'm going into this process all alone. and there's at least, 10 people from the school district, from the school that are there on the other side. I need to protect my daughter's privacy, so I don't feel comfortable going into a lot of detail today, but she had some really significant health issues requiring hospitalization last year. We had children's hospital doctors, her therapist, her psychiatrist, county agencies, the entire Prince George's local care team all said she was going to need some additional special education services, all documented. We go into an emergency IEP meeting and one individual from PGCPS said no. I cried for 15 minutes. No one stopped that meeting. No one offered to help, nothing. And I was overruled. I kept asking why, and I got no answer. So then my choices are either to give up on my kid or it's to spend tens of thousands of dollars. I had already put out $100,000 out of pocket for her healthcare last year. Those are two horrible choices. I plead with you to support adoptive parents like mine with kids with developmental disabilities. Please, let's get HB 294 on the books and leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Leclerc? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much for being here today. Next, virtually, Leslie Margolis.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Leslie Margolis. I am a managing attorney at Disability Rights Maryland, where I manage our education and mental health work. I'm also here on behalf of the Education Advocacy Coalition, which has close to 40 members, people who are individuals and organizations concerned with education policy throughout the state. Others have very effectively and very eloquently summarized why HB 294 is so important. I just want to make a few points. First, there seems to be some misunderstanding on the part of the opponents that somehow changing the burden of proof would create a presumption that school systems have not done their job. And in fact, that is not the case at all. Simply changing the burden of proof means that if there is a due process hearing, the school system would present its case first and would present its case that it in fact has complied with what federal and state laws require. The school districts are already required to provide documentation, to keep records, to write notes of why they make decisions at IEP meetings in what's called a prior written notice that justifies the decisions they make, the reasons for those decisions, everything else they considered, and the reasons they rejected those decisions. The school system has the records, they have the staff, they have administrators, they have lawyers. There is nothing about changing the burden that adds to the workload. I want to respond to that question about interpreters at meetings. It is a very difficult process for families to navigate. It is more difficult for families who don't speak English. This is important statewide. All parents need to have the same rights. Doing this district by district means that parents in one district might bear the burden and parents in another would not. From a due process perspective, that's a problem. It is also, the amendment is important because all families, if the burden shifts, should not have, it shouldn't shift based on particular issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Ms. Margolis? Thank you. Thank you for being here. Next, Nathan Farrell. Okay, he is no longer with us. So that concludes the testimony on House Bill 294. Recalling Delegate Boyce, thank you for your patience, Delegate Boyce. Calling House Bill 266.
Madam Chair, my panel is virtual.
Okay.
Is there a way to
yes.
Let them into the virtual room?
Yes, we have Alex Casper.
Yes.
Elaine Papp.
Yep.
Karen Babick.
Yep.
Sarah Choi or Chua.
Mm-hmm, Choi.
Sarah Christiana Sadramelli.
Yes,
And
Dr. Sadramelli. Yeah.
And Michaela Fritz.
That is correct. Thank you so much.
And Goldsboro. So I don't know that we can put them all on the screen at once.
It was.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Okay.
And then let me know, Madam Chair, when I can start.
Okay, let's see what we can get up here. One sec.
Awesome. I love technology. Thank you. Please don't. Sorry. Okay, no problem. Well, I will go ahead and start and not waste any of our precious time. Thank you so much. Good mid-afternoon. For the record, I am Delegate Regina T. Boyce here testifying today on HB 266, Public and Non-Public Schools Bronchodilator Availability and Use, or what we call the Bronchodilator Rescue Inhaler. For your historical reference, this bill was introduced in 2020 as HB 773, in 2021 as HB 609, and last year as HB 384, for which this committee carefully vetted and passed. It also passed the House, and like most good bills, died in the Senate. Thank you. No disrespect, it's just those are facts. So I want to reintroduce it for those who've been here, and of course those who haven't, give you some background. And so HB 266 requires public schools in the state and authorizes non-public schools to establish a policy to stock inhalers or albuterol in schools for emergency purposes or rescue inhaler. It's certainly requiring select school personnel to be trained to administer the inhaler by a school nurse professional at their discretion in the absence of a school nurse, and certainly removes personal liability of a nurse and those personnels. And I would just want to quote a couple of stats that Asthma and Allergy Network say that 7.6% of Maryland children have been diagnosed with asthma, and 56% of those children with asthma don't have an asthma plan on file at their school. And it is also reported that 19.2% of parents with asthmatic children report that their children miss 1 to 2 days of school because of their asthma. It's certainly one of the most leading causes of school absenteeism in the country. I want to add to those facts that essentially in the U.S., asthma is responsible for 10 deaths a day. Given certainly our shortage in school nurses, we feel that it can be somewhat of a public health or a school crisis, and so we want to create a process that allows for whether it is the school health professional and or their designee to be able to administer these, whether it's an inhaler or EpiPen or Narcan, to those who may need it. I want to state that across the state or across the country, this has been a movement where we have 15 states, Arizona, Arkansas, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Missouri, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, Ohio, Oklahoma, Utah, and Virginia who have stock albuterol laws. And we have 2 states, New York and Nebraska, who have stock albuterol as in their guidelines. At the federal level, which is incredibly important, Congressman Steny Hoyer introduced and passed H.R. 2468, which is the School-Based Allergies and Asthma Management Program Act in 2020. It became law January 2021. And what this does is amends the Public Health Service Act to increase the preference given in awarding certain allergy and asthma-related grants to states that require certain public schools to have allergy and asthma management programs. The federal act certainly allows states to create and implement these programs as needed with financial assistance. And I also want to add, recently $3 million was added to this program. So if this body decides to pass this bill, you better position Maryland to be able to go after those funds. I think I want to talk quickly just about what the opposition is going to say. They're going to say that that this is potentially not needed, that an EpiPen can do the work of an inhaler. They're going to talk about their uncomfortability with a nurse or a professional providing training to a designee, in which I say that that health professional can make that decision on who they would like to train, and that doesn't necessarily mean because I'm a designee that I must be mandated to be the designee per the school health professional. I also want to point out that Hawaii has also introduced legislation about stock albuterol, and I also want to talk about luckily for me, I actually talked to a public school nurse in Baltimore City the other day, or excuse me, from Baltimore County, and there may be a disagreement about what comes first if someone is in distress. Do you administer an EpiPen? Because one would say that an allergic reaction is essentially, or asthma attack is an allergic reaction, and therefore you would give an EpiPen. And you have others who would say that you would assess the situation and make a determination of what you would provide first. Regardless of what you believe, I am saying that this is just another tool in the toolbox for our health professionals, for our children with asthma, and most importantly, it's another stock like we have Narcan in our schools in case someone's parent or child has an overdose in school. We have an EpiPen, and what I am suggesting and what I am asking and what you will hear from the panel is why it's also important to add a stock inhaler to this list of life-saving tools. And so with that, and with the help of my panel, I'm urging you to again to look at this, to again vet this, and to again, as you did last time, pass this bill. And thank you for your time and consideration of HB 266. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Delegate, and thank you again for your patience as we shifted bills around. We will now go to your panel, which is virtual. Let's start with Alex Casper and then go to Elaine Papp.
Thank you.
Chair Wilkins and members of the committee. My name is Alex Casper, and I'm the Director of Advocacy for the American Lung Association. We're pleased to support House Bill 266 and thank Delegate Boyce for her tireless advocacy to keep Maryland kids safe in schools. You have my written testimony, so which is much more detailed, so I'll keep my comment brief and just focus on a couple of important points. Today, we're here talking about having asthma medications available in schools for kids who are in respiratory stress. This is no different than the current statute for EpiPen or Narcan. I want to note that you will hear from my clinical colleagues today that rescue asthma medications, namely albuterol, is a safe medication, safer than epinephrine, and I ask you to keep this in mind as we move through today's hearing. Albuterol is the gold standard for asthma care. You have heard this or will hear this from my colleagues who are specialists who deal with pediatric asthma patients and their families day in and day out. They educate families and caregivers every day on the signs and symptoms of asthma. They understand the standard of care and treatment and management of asthma. And anyone you hear from today, they wouldn't be here in support of this bill if we were proposing something that wasn't the standard of care or safe. The policy, as Delegate Boyce mentioned, passed in 17 states. including Virginia, with broad stakeholder support, inclusive of some groups that you may hear from today who are expressing concern in Maryland. You may hear today that it's hard to tell the difference between an allergic reaction and an asthma flare. I will defer to my colleagues, the clinical experts who educate families and caregivers. Families like mine who have a child with both a food allergy and asthma. I can tell the difference between the two, and honestly, so can my son. I also leave you with this final thought. This bill is about equity. It is about ensuring that children who need this medication in the case of an emergency can access it, regardless if they have the right paperwork in place. I ask you to support this bill as you did last year and protect children in Maryland schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We'll go to Elaine Papp and then Karen Babcock.
Chairman Atterbury and members of the committee. My name is Elaine Papp. I'm a registered nurse with a master's degree. I'm here before you to advocate for HB 266. In 2018, working as a school health nurse, I saved a student's life, but I lost my job. The student had an asthma attack, but did not have an asthma inhaler available and did not have doctor's orders in the health unit. Paramedics were called, but were delayed in responding. The student lost consciousness and was continuing to gasp for air at an alarming rate. I gave the student someone else's albuterol inhaler. I lost my job because I made a decision to save a student's life and to break the rules. The rules never give a student another's medication and never give a medication you don't have a doctor's order for. As a registered nurse, I had access to Maryland asthma guidelines. I had EpiPen, I had Narcan, yet I did not have an emergency medication to treat the most common life-threatening illness among Maryland's children, asthma. I've included the details of this harrowing event in my written testimony, and now I want to address the opposition to this bill. You will hear that some of the bill's provisions are dangerous for children and could lead to a child's death. This is misinformation. When you listen to the opposition, please keep in mind that Dr. Sadramelli is one of Maryland's foremost child asthma specialists. Dr. Choi is a pharmacist specializing in pediatric emergency medications. Both support all of the provisions of this bill. The National Association of School Health Nurses and the American Lung Association, the Allergy Asthma Network, worked with the American Thoracic Society to develop the Access to Albuterol in Schools policy in 2021. The policy recommends all states enact legislation with the provisions that we include in HB 266. Why would all of these specialists support this bill if it was dangerous to children? And why would people who have dedicated their lives to treating children advocate for these provisions if children would suffer? They wouldn't. Please keep this in mind as you hear the opposition's testimony. I urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Karen, you can begin, and then we'll go to Sarah Choi.
Thank you to the chair and the Ways and Means Committee members for seeing us today. My name is Karen Babcock. I am a respiratory therapist for Johns Hopkins Hospital, specifically in pediatrics. I am testifying in support of HB 266 concerning the use of stock albuterol in the Maryland schools. My written testimony, which you have, is very detailed, so I'm just going to kind of give you my honest opinion. I have worked as a respiratory therapist for 21 years. For those of you that don't know what a respiratory therapist is, it entails everything breathing. On the regular, I make sure that my patients are breathing. I am one of our management staff, and therefore I do a lot of education with other RTs, nurses, physicians, and other team members to make sure that they are adequately educated on how to use and what happens when you do use an albuterol inhaler. I will tell you personally, in the years that I have done this, I have never had an incident that resulted in harm or death of a patient in regards to albuterol. What I can say is I've given plenty of albuterol to patients who did and did not need it, including those without an asthmatic diagnosis, as well as given to my own child who does not have asthma. The potential benefit in these moments outweighed the possible side effects. I want to highlight that albuterol does not mask other conditions besides asthma. For example, if someone was experiencing shortness of breath due to pneumonia, if they got albuterol, it would not reverse or significantly reduce symptoms unless they happen to also have asthma.
There are so many medications that are available, but albuterol is the quick fix. And unfortunately for these kids that aren't documented with an asthmatic diagnosis, in schools, their first asthma attack very well could be their last. We hope that you will vote in favor of this bill, HB 266. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Sarah, you can begin, and then we'll hear from Dr. Sandra Melli.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilkins and members of this committee. My name is Sarah Troy, and I'm a pediatric pharmacist at the Johns Hopkins Pediatric Emergency Department. I am testifying today to the safety and efficacy of albuterol inhalers and to the necessity of this legislation. In the event of an asthma attack, you have inflammation and constriction of these small microscopic airways in the lungs that can lead to difficulty breathing, wheezing, and respiratory distress. Albuterol is a medication that works quickly to relax the smooth muscles in these small airways, which open them up and make it easier for a person to breathe. Immediate interventions are necessary in anyone presenting with severe respiratory distress because if untreated, an asthma attack can lead to cardiorespiratory arrest and potentially death. There is inaccurate information that albuterol can kill a patient. This is false information as albuterol is extremely effective and one of the safest medications we use in medicine. Albuterol works quickly in less than 5 minutes and has minor adverse effects such as tremor, increased heart rate, and jitteriness. The only contraindication to administering albuterol would be a previous anaphylactic reaction to albuterol, which is extremely rare. The benefit of administering albuterol in a child presenting with respiratory distress outweighs any potential risk of albuterol. Again, albuterol does not kill a patient, but withholding albuterol from a child who desperately needs it can lead to death. Providing albuterol to a child who does not have asthma will not cause harm, but providing albuterol to a child who does have asthma will save a life. As someone who is the expert in medications, I can attest that albuterol is a safe, effective, and necessary for our children to have access to in these schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony, Dr. Sandra Melli, and then we'll hear from Michaela Fritz.
Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the committee. My name is Dr. Christy Sadramelli. I'm a physician and a pediatric pulmonologist at Johns Hopkins. I'm testifying today in support of HB 266 as a pediatric asthma expert, a mother, and a citizen of Maryland. This bill provides an emergency inhaler for schools. Teenagers forget their inhalers. Kids may have their first ever asthma attack at school. The inhaler may be locked in the gym teacher's office and so on. There's a lot of things that can happen. And very commonly, the school knows the child has asthma, but doesn't have the paperwork and doesn't have the medication, which is really more common for kids who are medically underserved in places like Baltimore City and rural areas of our state. Getting the paperwork and medication requires parents taking off work, going to the doctor, and patients or parents with transportation, financial, or other barriers are less likely to get it done. It's an equity issue. Unfortunately, these same children who face barriers are the ones at highest risk for severe asthma outcomes like hospitalizations, ICU stays, and death. Treating asthma attacks without delay makes these outcomes much less likely to occur. The bill is written in a way that the American Thoracic Society, American Lung Association, Asthma Allergy Network, and the National Association of School Nurses recommend. And I should know, I helped them write the guidelines. They and I recommend that you don't limit the bill to those with a documented diagnosis of asthma. Albuterol is extremely safe and it won't mask other diagnoses. It's the gold standard for asthma emergencies. In the past, those opposing our bill have tried to make albuterol sound dangerous, but it's one of the safest medications we give. They've tried to make this seem too complicated to learn, but it's not. I teach lay people, parents, how to give albuterol and to distinguish between asthma attacks and anaphylaxis every week in my clinic. So we can teach schools too, just like they're doing all around the country. Albuterol should not scare us, but untreated asthma should scare us. If you have questions today or anytime, please reach out. You can email, call, or ask me. I'm so happy to connect with any of you. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Very much appreciate all of your work. Michaela Fritz, and then finally for our last virtual presenter, Ann Goldsboro.
Members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Michaela Fritz, and I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I was a school nurse for Howard County Public School System through December 2021. I am testifying today in support of this bill. I am here on my own behalf and not on behalf of my employer. As a school nurse, I was responsible for the medical care of over 800 middle school students at a public school. Parents were required to submit an emergency preparedness form and any medications at the beginning of the school year. However, parents would frequently forget to submit this information, or more often, simply send their child to school with their medication in their backpack without providing the school with its own supply or submitting the paperwork. In the fall of 2021, a student, a known asthmatic, needed albuterol. He was sent to the health room for a cough and was wheezing, an obvious asthma attack. I administered albuterol as prescribed, his cough subsided, and he returned to class. Approximately 4 hours later, he returned with serious respiratory distress. I tried to administer his albuterol inhaler again, however, the pump clogged. It stopped working. The student had an extra albuterol inhaler in his pocket that his mom had given him that morning. Under the guidelines, I should have confiscated the medications and not allowed him to use it. Instead, he took the albuterol and 911 was called. Fortunately, the medication helped. By the time EMS arrived, his severe symptoms had subsided. This experience has had a profound impact on me, professionally and personally. I was thankful that his mother had the foresight to give him the extra inhaler, even though this was not allowed. Fortunately, I did not, not only would I have to have had my own albuterol inhaler supply, I would have had permission to use it in emergency situations. Some nurses in my shoes who have done the same thing similarly have lost their jobs. I strongly encourage you guys to support this bill.
Thank you again for your testimony. Finally, Ann Goldsboro.
Hello, and thank you for allowing me to speak today in support of House Bill 266. My name is Ann Goldsboro. I'm a registered nurse with a master's degree, and I work in the Pediatric Pulmonology Division at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I have years of experience taking care of school-age asthma patients. I'm also the parent of school-age children with asthma and food allergies, and the views that I express are my own. House Bill 266 makes good sense, and it should be passed. Other states have taken similar measures. At least 17 states already allow bronchodilators, which are asthma rescue medications, to be kept in school as stock medications for breathing emergencies like asthma attacks. Bronchodilators like albuterol are safe and effective. The risks of using these medications are low. Bronchodilators provide quick, life-saving relief for breathing problems. It's easy to learn how to recognize and treat asthma attacks. I spent my morning today in asthma clinic and taught exactly this to half a dozen families. As a pediatric pulmonology nurse, I know I'm biased, but if you're not breathing, nothing else matters. Breathing problems affect many children. Approximately 10% of school-age children have asthma, and the rates are higher for minority children and low-income children. Asthma attacks can be life-threatening. Quick access to an albuterol inhaler with spacer can and does save lives. Starting treatment right away can turn an asthma attack around, preventing costly emergency department visits. This will also help students remain in the classroom and parents remain at work. Those children who need a bronchodilator treatment urgently could have it with a school nurse and then return to class rather than going home for a sick day with a parent who has to urgently take a day off. I urge you to support House Bill 266. I'm confident that keeping stock albuterol on hand in schools is good public policy and that it would benefit the children of Maryland.
Thank you, and thank you so much, this entire panel, for your service in the medical field. We appreciate the time that you've taken out to be with us today. I do see a few questions for this panel. Let's start with Delegate Polakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Delegate Boyce, for bringing this bill back. This question's for you or for anyone on your panel. I'm not quite sure who maybe the appropriate person is. I don't have concerns at this time about the stocking of the albuterol. This has to do with the first part of the bill, which has to do with who would be able to administer an EpiPen or epinephrine injection. So right now under state law, it's a school nurse or other personnel, but this bill appears to narrow that to you would need sign off from someone who's undergone certain training. Can someone speak to the rationale for why that's in the bill?
I can, and then my panel can follow up. And so, look, we know we have a shortage of nurses. And in the case of Miss Elaine Papp's story, she was the nurse there. The inhaler wasn't available. And so here's the issue. There's no school nurses fully in schools every day. There isn't a nurse, for instance, on Tuesday and Thursday. The question I continue to ask is, if an incident happens, whether it's a need for Narcan, whether it's a need for the EpiPen, whether it's the need for an inhaler, who administers the medicine? And so that has been the question, given the lack of personnel. Who then administers the medicine? Who is the second quote unquote in charge to do so? And so we set it up so that the professionals, the nursing professionals, could decide if they're not there, then who would be their designee? Who do they feel that they can train? Whether it's I don't want to speculate on who that would be, but they would be able to make that decision on who that quote unquote designee is. Because again, if they're not there to be the administrators of the medication, who is? And so we use this language to help make that determination on their part and for the schools. And if someone on the panel wants to elaborate, they're welcome to.
Is there anyone on the panel that wants to speak on this question?
So within Howard County, we would train teachers and individuals, because obviously school nurses can not always go on like a field trip, for instance. And so if there's a child with allergies, or if there is a child that has like tube feedings, then we would accompany the child or train the teachers prior to. So we have teachers trained, principals trained, and it needs to be a certain amount of people should someone be sick and be out. So, but in Howard County, we pretty much trained all the teachers and signed off on them as the school nurse.
All right, thank you. We'll go to the next question. Oh, go ahead, Delegate Polak-Vitraskar.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Delegate Boyce, for that information. I will just say, as the parent of a student who has a life-threatening food allergy, the letter of the law right now is a school nurse and other school personnel. So this actually could present a barrier in terms of saying that you would need the sign off of someone who has training. So I would love to work with you on this section.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Miller.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. So I do appreciate the training aspect of it, and so however you work out the barrier, I think that would be wonderful, because from my perspective and from the school, the more people that you have trained in recognizing and how to administer, I think the better. So that's my piece on the education. The biggest thing, though, when I was on the board and we had some of these come through, is the cost. And so the fiscal note was a little unclear, and also it's not just the cost, but it's shortages.
Sure.
And then we also had the issue with the price gouging of the EpiPen and things like that. Is there any issues that you or the panel has foreseen with any
So
of that?
I don't, and so I'm sorry I failed to bring this with me, but last year or the year before, I got information from Baltimore City, for instance, how they supply their EpiPen and Narcan, and they receive grants. Then it ends up being somewhat of a zero cost, which is why I put this federal bill information in here, because the federal bill would allow jurisdictions, allow the state to be able to apply for those grant fundings to be able to pay for such costs.
And I also appreciate how you put it, the donation, that they can accept the donation from a licensed manufacturer or pharmacy. I think that's also a great idea.
Yes, ma'am.
And then this does not preclude, parents would still go through the normal process where they bring their medications for their child and they have the doctor's orders and everything like this. This would only be supplementing.
Yes, there is a concern that it needs to be broader, because again, I'm not somebody who is an asthmatic, but from what I understand with asthma, it is not diagnosed until you actually have an incident. And really this movement across the country, and the panel can echo, is that the first sign is sudden death. And as much as possible, if there's a tool in the toolbox, we can start alleviating that. But most importantly, to the point of having then to call in an ambulance and all those things, then it can kind of start the process for those who don't have these plans on file to be able to start that process to get a plan on file, be properly diagnosed, and most importantly, be properly fitted with the quote unquote inhaler that would be best for them. So,
Thank you. Thank
no,
you very
you're
much.
quite welcome, Delegate.
Looks like virtual witness Elaine wanted to respond as well.
I did want to respond to the cost. Albuterol inhalers, the smaller ones, have 60 puffs. A dose is 2 puffs. And there are little cardboard spacers that they put on the inhaler to be able to give it to more than one person without contaminating the inhaler, this one-way valve. So you would have most likely 1 inhaler per school. And they usually run, I'm not sure of today's prices, but I know last year we were talking about around $60 for an inhaler. And then the little spacers come in a pack of about 100, and they usually run about $10, maybe $20. So the inhaler and the spacers would be about $80. There is a study that was done at the University of Arizona on the cost of a program that was put into in Pima County. And so they have actual cost figures from that county, which would probably be translatable to here as well. So we expect that with the development of a training program, a more extensive training program, as Mickey mentioned, we do have training programs in the schools. We trained all the teachers who were taking a student on a field trip how to use the inhaler, and we would give the inhaler to the teachers. So the training program is basically there. In addition, the University of Arizona has a training program that they could make available for free. So we expect maybe the startup costs would be around maybe $150 for, developing paperwork and training and so forth for the first year. And then after that, maybe about $70, $80 per school. So that gives you a kind of a ballpark idea.
Any other questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much again. And thank you, Delegate.
Oh, you're quite welcome, thank you.
We do have several people here in person who are unfavorable. I will call them up now. Robin Elliott, Liz Elliott, Catherine Ling, Jade Coburn, and John Willems.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Robin Elliott, I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Nurses Association and did want to let the committee know that Ms. Ling had an unexpected conflict, so she will not be here today. We wanted to start off by thanking Delegate Boyce and this committee for their continued focus on the health of children in schools. And this committee is the one that put extra money in the blueprint to expand school-based health centers. What you will hear today is not concern about the stock bronchodilator piece, but whether the issue about having a non-clinician distinguish between when someone's having an asthma attack and having an anaphylactic shock. I will just wanted to point out in your packet, there is a letter from the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical System Services, or MEMS, and they posit that it is not a simple task for a healthcare practitioner to distinguish between the two, let alone a layperson. And in fact, they say that their technicians may not administer the medications independently as a result. So even within the MEMS system, they view that the MEMS training isn't sufficient. There has to be another layer in order to distinguish between whether an EpiPen should be used or albuterol. Happy to answer questions, and thank you for your time.
Next person can begin.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Liz Elliott, no relation to Robin, and I'm a school nurse working and living in Montgomery County. I've worked in school health since 2009 and am the president-elect of the Maryland Association of School Health Nurses. I'm opposed to HB 266 because the intent of the bill is really important to safeguard health of students. It does raise safety concerns in terms of identifying the difference between asthma and anaphylaxis, thus raising the risk of deterring appropriate medical care to students experiencing anaphylaxis. I absolutely agree on strategies to address the health of children in schools and children experiencing respiratory distress. The concern is symptoms of asthma and symptoms of anaphylaxis in a student who does not, and we don't know which it is, can be really difficult to determine, even for nurses. That's a diagnosis that is made by a healthcare provider. And every health room, every school in Maryland, public schools have stock epinephrine already there, and school nurses train unlicensed staff to give that stock epinephrine. We call 911, and our EMS partners transport students to the emergency room. Currently, care for students with asthma with a prescribed bronchodilator is that the students are given their inhaler and then sent back to the classroom to finish the day with their teachers. So my concern is the bill would allow for unlicensed, non-medical laypersons who are absolutely well-meaning and doing their best to differentiate, make a medical differentiation between asthma and anaphylaxis. Thank you very much for the committee's time, and I very much appreciate everyone here.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and other members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Jade Coburn, and I'm a medical doctor in pediatrics, trained at Johns Hopkins, and currently specializing in the field of preventive medicine and public health in Baltimore. I've cared for kids in a range of settings who suffered from asthma exacerbations in Maryland, and those who have died from this disease remain presently in my mind and constantly cause me to question what more can be done. I've practiced in emergency rooms, a pediatric ICU, primary care clinics, and a school-based health center. These experiences have shown me how important addressing timely and appropriate medical care for asthma is. Although I'm here today in opposition, I would like to thank Delegate Boyce for drawing attention to asthma. I believe that the spirit of this bill has good intention to improve access to care for kids in schools. But I do ask that you give an unfavorable vote on House Bill 266 because I'm concerned that it would allow someone in a school setting to inappropriately give a bronchodilator like albuterol instead of epinephrine to a child in anaphylactic shock, and this mistake could be deadly. These two conditions can be hard to distinguish, especially in a child who hasn't had a diagnosis of asthma, and for someone who doesn't have any clinical training or experience. I do not believe the clinical guidance presented in HB 266 is safe, and the unintended consequences could cost a child's life. The Maryland Department of Health has already set school guidelines that address health emergencies and respiratory distress. This would be a more appropriate entity to safely determine who should administer a bronchodilator and under what circumstances that it should be given. Thank you all for your time and attention to this issue. I hope we can all agree that we want to see children in Maryland succeed in schools and be in good health. Thank you.
Mr. Williams.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, John Williams with the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, testifying in opposition to House Bill 266 for the reasons you've heard described today. We share the objection raised by school nurses about the risks of the unintended consequences associated with the legislation. And this is the risk of requiring local boards of education, not experts in the delivery of health services, to draft policies under which our staff, including staff who are not trained health professionals, to administer inhalers and EpiPens in accordance with the strictures of the law. We wholly agree with the comments that you've just heard that these issues are much more appropriately governed by the school health services guidelines issued by MSDE, We're on record this session in supporting a bill that is crafted in such a way as to guide the updating and enhancement of particularly, those school health guidance documents. But this bill is much more prescriptive and much more directive as to how school systems would have to adopt policies directing the rights and responsibilities of staff to act outside the purview that is considered safe or prudent by the health professionals and the school health professionals that you've heard from today. And look, as a parent who spent a lot of quality time over a child's crib with a nebulizer, having a child who is at risk for respiratory distress is distressing, to say the least. And to entrust the school system to implement the school health plan in accordance with the doctor's orders is a significant responsibility for the school system. We want to get that right, and unfortunately, we don't believe that this bill does so. As amended last year, we continued to oppose it when it moved over to the Senate, and for those reasons are continuing to oppose it again this year. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for this panel? I see Delegate Attar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so I'm speaking as a mother I had to administer albuterol this morning. My son's had, I think, 2 asthma attacks this week. He has to have albuterol at least twice a day. And he also has had to use an EpiPen before, and we carry it around at all times. Now, I don't believe the intent of this bill is to have people who aren't qualified administer it. I would love, ideally, for there to be a nurse available all day at the school, even when my son is playing sports after school activities and things like that, to be available. But what about the times when that nurse isn't there? I am worried at all times that the nurse could be in the bathroom and my son's albuterol is locked in her cabinet. So I'm one of those mothers who has sent an extra one with my son, even though I probably violated the school rules because at a time he was too young to do that, but I still did it because I'd rather him have it on himself. So my question is, isn't it, I know you said that it could be life-threatening to have, and I believe the doctor mentioned this, I'm sorry I forgot your name, but I know you said it could be life-threatening to administer the wrong thing, but we are talking about life-threatening situations already. If I didn't have that EpiPen when my son was a baby to give it to him, he probably would have died. If I didn't have that albuterol to give it to him, every time he has an asthma attack, he can die. So why, this bill is for situations like that. I understand my colleague to the right of me mentioned that there's certain things in the bill that we may need to work on and have some amendments. I agree with that. Let's work on that with the sponsor. But overall, why is this a bad bill when it's trying to save their lives?
So I think I'll unpack, there was a lot in your statement, and I'll try and unpack it and rely on my colleague here. Albuterol is absolutely 100% safe and should be widely available for students who have inhalers in school at all times. In Montgomery County and really across the state, nurses do train unlicensed staff to be backup everywhere, to know where the keys are, to be able to get into the cabinet, to access the medication. The risk is not in giving the albuterol itself. The risk is in not giving epinephrine and not calling 911 and delaying definitive medical treatment for anaphylaxis, which is a true medical emergency. That's the risk, is the delay. And the allergists will say if a child or an adult is having an anaphylactic reaction, every minute you delay giving them epinephrine makes the complications more. Children might be in the hospital, they may die because we've waited on a life-saving medication. Albuterol itself is an exceedingly safe drug, absolutely. Okay. But what if we don't give the epi in time and we don't call 911?
Okay, so then I guess there's 2 parts of this bill. We have the albuterol and we have the epi. So I'm understanding there's no concern with albuterol. The schools should all have the albuterol. Am I understanding that correctly?
So the concern is if the albuterol is for a student that has, we don't know they have asthma, they don't have a diagnosis, they don't have a prescription that they got, that it was left at home. It may well be anaphylaxis and not asthma, and the concern is an unlicensed layperson making a medical diagnosis instead of a healthcare provider and getting it wrong and delaying definitive care.
So I guess I'll leave this as more of a comment and more rhetorical than a question. I believe, and I know it's a fact, that, like you said, if you delay treatment, it can kill them. So not having someone there, whether they're fully trained or not, is delaying treatment. That's where my concern is. Adding to this bill that they're required to dial 911 first, maybe that's something we should do, because yes, we need the ambulance to come. But I do believe this is a good bill. Maybe we can work on a few amendments to make it better, but I thank the sponsor for this bill. Thank you.
Do you want me to clarify one of your points?
Yes, please.
The problem doesn't lie with stock albuterol being accessible. The way it currently exists in my understanding of the law is that if a child were in respiratory distress, the nurse could give, or a person, any person in the school could give epinephrine. Epinephrine is a drug that we use to treat asthma exacerbations. We use it to treat severe asthma exacerbations. It's a life-saving medication for children with asthma, as well as albuterol. The concern is that the language of this bill, for a child, we don't know. They've never wheezed before, they don't have a diagnosis of a food allergy, and they don't have a diagnosis yet of asthma. For that child, this bill opens up a window of an unintended consequence that child could be having a food allergy, and someone in the school system would inappropriately try to give them an inhaler, delay treatment with epinephrine as the current law school guidelines exist to give them epinephrine, and for that child, they could lose their life. Every person in this room, I would have no problem with you just getting albuterol right now. It is a safe medication. It is. It's kind of the loophole that this might create for a child that we don't know that they have a diagnosis.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions for this panel? All right, I'm missing two people. My apologies. Delegate Wells and then Delegate Long.
Well, okay, there we go. I know not everyone can hear if we don't use a microphone, so I want to be mindful of other people. So I guess I need some clarification of things, because in my mind, I was thinking that we're talking about two types of scenarios. And the one that I'm going to say first is the one that I was thinking is the primary. Someone like my colleague whose son is diagnosed with asthma and other allergies that require EpiPens as well. And her providing the additional, inhaler for him to have on his body in the event that he has it. I'm assuming that in a case like that, that students, teachers, and what have you are aware of his health guidelines and what his needs are. So I'm thinking in a situation like that, we all know that that person needs this, and therefore it would be probably not out of order for folks to assume that they might be having a episode. Then it sounds like there are other young people who have never been diagnosed, don't have a record with, either with whoever their doctor is or with the school of having asthma. So my question to you is your concern in terms of liability, in terms of just the greater health impact, your concern is more with the second option of a young person that has no, okay. So is it your feeling that you would like to see this bill perhaps speak more clearly on that element of how this could be applied?
So, Robin Elliott again from the Maryland Nurses Association. We've seen very complicated school health issues come up. One of the last ones was with actually medical cannabis, which was about 3 or 4 years ago. What we have found is that the school health guideline process, which involves all the stakeholders who have come with the issue, school health nurses, MEMS, and the two state agencies, the State Department of Education and Maryland Department of Health. I'm sorry, that was a long list of stakeholders, just to show it's very inclusive, that process can yield very, very positive results, because I think one of the underlying goals of this bill and the stock bronchodilators, I think picked up correctly, that is not as much of a concern. I think there needs to be some protocol issues worked out, that the school guidelines could do that. It is truly that, what do you do with the child who doesn't have a diagnosis?
Can we, but, so you brought up the school health guidelines and medical guidelines, but can we, we're a body where there's a lot of different, we present bills, there's different issues that are impacting. We also know that there's existing guidelines or existing bodies of oversight. So can we also, would you say that we can do both? Like, we can improve the guidelines, but we can also ensure that young people have access, or our students have access in spaces where teachers there's a lot of things going on and it's not always accessible to get to wherever the EpiPen or where their albuterol might be located. Can we agree that we can do both at the same time? We can ensure that they have access, folks have access to this, but also continue to strengthen. We don't have to say, I guess I'm getting the sense of like there's a lot of other things going on in schools when it comes to health of our students that we need to continue to improve, but we shouldn't make this, what is it, perfect the enemy, good the enemy of perfect, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And to me, this seems like a scenario where this is a good thing to do. There may be other things going on that are not perfect. So help me understand, is my viewpoint, is that completely flawed, or do you agree that there is a way for us to ensure that something like this bill that's seeking to provide access to care for issues, for health emergencies that are very timely in terms of the action, but we can also work separately to improve the other guidelines that schools are charged with doing when it comes to health issues?
So one thing to think about is, certainly this body could do both, is that on the school health guidelines process, usually happens in the summer. That's probably not a surprise. That's when there's time. And they can be implemented by the beginning of school. And that's what we did with medical cannabis. And that was a very intensive process. I wouldn't imagine this would be quite as intensive. So really kind of looking at what is the core thing that the committee wants, I think could be very much accomplished through those school health guidelines. There may be areas where the law needs to be changed, and that would be a really good place to identify specifically what needs to be changed to build support amongst the stakeholders. Really important partner in this process is MEMS, because the protocol in all of these cases is always to call 911. And so that's one of the reasons why we really look to the school health guidelines process. I've been around for a while, and I'm trying to think of all the other instances where that has happened. Senator Shirley Nathan Pulliam had a sickle cell anemia initiative that went through the school health guidelines and very proactively. I think that families were very pleased. So I've seen very positive things come out of that. And part of the challenge is kind of narrowing and figuring out what is the right thing to do from a clinical standpoint, and then figuring out if there needs to be changes in the law.
Okay, and one last question, and I will be done. And I hear everything that you're saying. I guess my last final question is, why does this need to wait? Why not pass this now? Why not, when we're talking about this type of issue where lives could be lost, why do you see fit that we should wait until the summer to do a process and then have that process be what we use to play out? Why not use our authority as a legislative body to ensure that every young person, I don't know if the case to wait has been made really clear, and I guess that's more of a isn't that so comment, so I will end there. Thank you.
Delegate Long, did you still have a question? All right, that question has been answered. Any other questions for this panel? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony and your time. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 266. Thank you. Now, colleagues, we do need to recall a previous bill, House Bill 294. We missed one unfavorable witness who wanted to testify. Thank you so much for your testimony and our apologies, Mr. Nathan Farrell. Now begins the hearing on HB 294 again, and please go ahead for your 2 minutes.
Greetings, committee, and I also want to express my gratitude. My name is Nathan Farrell with the Baltimore Teachers Union. I want to express my gratitude to your staff who fielded my phone call as I was in the Zoom waiting room but could not testify virtually. It's been a long day and a long wait, and I'm so grateful for the service of the committee. My name is Nathan Farrell. I'm testifying on behalf of the Baltimore Teachers Union. The Baltimore Teachers Union opposes House Bill 294. The Baltimore Teachers Union represents 8,280 educators. We are 4 out of 5 workers in Baltimore City Public Schools. Special educators want what's best for the students they support. Unfortunately, HB 294 runs counter to these goals. HB 294 could dramatically increase the workload for our already understaffed and incredibly overworked special educators in city schools and take away time from working with our students. Educators and parents need support and resources to come together for the benefit of students, not reforms that will divide us. In Baltimore City, special education continues to suffer from a critical shortage, an acutely critical shortage, and this is understanding that there are statewide challenges of staffing at our schools. This year alone, Baltimore City faces unprecedented vacancies in special education, resulting in untenable and unsustainable workloads for our special educators. And this bill would only worsen than help to address our staffing crisis. Many schools do not have necessary support or clerical staff to even assist special educators with the administrative tasks and that accompany their essential duties. I want to reiterate that Baltimore City is uniquely different than other districts in the state due to these acutely difficult staffing issues we have at our schools. Expanding staffing and student support promised by the blueprint and the accountability and oversight provided by mechanisms such as the recently created Special Education Ombudsman in the AG's office are far better pathways to delivering strong and transparent special education programs for our students. We all want to do right by our students. Please, the Baltimore Teachers Union urges you to vote unfavorably against House Bill 294. A lot of gratitude to this committee. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Farrell, and thank you again for your patience. We appreciate your testimony. Any questions for this witness? All right, seeing none, that ends the hearing again on the chairwoman's House bill, and we are going to now call up Majority Leader Delegate Mark Corman for his hearing on HB 243. I'd also like to call up his panel of witnesses, Susan Grief, Morgan Miller, and Tamar Sarnoff.
Thank you, Madam Chair, who I never get tired of congratulating on your new vice chairmanship. For the record, I am Mark Corman here with you on HB 243, the Young Readers Program Expansion Act. Just a brief history lesson for those of you new to the committee. There's something called Imagination Library, although there are other programs like it. It's the Dolly Parton program, for those of you who are familiar with it, where they send a book a month to children under 5 for families that opt in to help enhance reading and literacy and reading comprehension at home. About 7 years ago, the governor established this program specifically for Baltimore City. Last year, we put that Baltimore City program in statute, really this committee put that Baltimore City program in statute, and then created a matching grant program for the rest of the state, for affiliates in other parts of the state to apply to the Office of unfortunately, Crime Control and Prevention in the governor's office, so that other places besides Baltimore City could benefit from this program. The funding mandate just kicked in, so it's in this year's budget as it's come in from Governor Moore, so the program is just getting started up. So I'm here this year to ask for a couple of changes. The most important, I think, is to move the program from the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention to the State Library Agency, which is really where it belongs. And in most other states that have these programs, that is where the program resides, in the State Library Agency. And you're going to hear from them, but I think they're supportive of of the move. In addition, because I'm over on the Appropriations Committee, I got to ask for an increased appropriation as well for the mandated appropriation in the bill to try to increase the amount of money available for the affiliates around the state. The bill does require a little bit of a cleanup amendment, which we'll send over. There was a little sloppy language around the Baltimore City program. This is not meant to change anything about the Baltimore City program, which is its own unit that's existed for 7 years and should continue to do so. The matching grant program is for the rest of the state, affiliates around the rest of the state. So that's the bill, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to either take questions or turn to the panel.
The other witnesses can begin.
That's for you. Thanks. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of this bill. I'm Susan Greif. I'm with Imagination Library of Montgomery County, Maryland. We currently serve about 2,700 children from birth to age 5, which is about 4% of eligible kids in our county. We are one of 17 affiliates of Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, and together we serve about 38,000 children, 10% of those eligible. There's one mission: to provide free books to children. One book every month is mailed to the child at their home. The books reflect multicultural diversity, and 2 of them every year are English-Spanish translations. Books and early literacy skills are critical to kindergarten readiness. Unfortunately, the latest kindergarten learning assessment scores show that 54% of children in Montgomery County and 60% statewide do not demonstrate the knowledge needed to be successful in kindergarten from day 1. But reading aloud is a critical way that we can improve those numbers. Maryland needs new and innovative programs to address these literacy gaps in an equitable way. What could be better than getting one book a month mailed to a child for $2.20? Affiliates pay for all of the books that are sent to their children, so enrollment is often limited by the funds that are available. A state grant-making program can be a game changer for all of us. And I will end with a fun fact and some words from Dolly Parton. 1 in 10 children in the United States currently receives an Imagination Library book. And you can never get enough books in the hands of children. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that. My name's Morgan Miller, and I want to thank and say good afternoon. Thank you, Vice Chair Wilkins, members of the committee, and especially to my representatives in Cecil County, Delegate Hornberger and Delegate Griffith. I'm the Executive Director of the Cecil County Public Library, as well as the Intergovernmental Relations Chair for the Maryland Association of Public Library Administrators. And today I'm testifying on behalf of all public library systems in Maryland in support of HB 243. I want to thank Delegate Corman for his initial leadership to champion early childhood education and access by introducing last year's Baltimore City Young Readers program, and now his foresight in working with the Maryland State Library Agency and public library systems all across our state to expand this program. As a librarian, educator, and a parent, I've experienced firsthand the impact that access to books and literacy has very early in a child's life. I, along with the experts, believe that within the critical window of the ages birth to 5, we have the greatest opportunity to impact a person's long-term development and success in life. It's why so many of our library programs are directed at children and caregivers at this stage of human development. So often, libraries are the first point of contact for that child and their family to engage with books and learning. And for many of our people in our state who can't afford to purchase books or travel to museums or other enrichment activities, libraries are the only point of contact. Research from a 2010 study on family culture and educational success determined that children with books in the home will perform better in school and in life. A child growing up in a home with just 25 books will, on average, complete 2 years more school than would a child from a home without any books at all. In Cecil County, we've used this program, this information, to develop our own early childhood outreach programs and have partnered with our local Dolly Parton Imagination Library affiliate to extend it as well. We're currently, through that program, serving only 900 of the 6,000 children in our community who are eligible. Our county has historically struggled with kindergarten readiness rates. We have some of the lowest in the state. And this program, as well as the Dolly Parton Imaginary Library affiliate, has really helped to move the needle on that, especially now as learning loss has been exacerbated by the pandemic. By expanding this program across the state, we'll be able to continue our work to move the needle in early childhood education, both through library programs as well as our affiliate partnerships. So I want to ask for your support in making sure that all children in our state are impacted by this moderatively small investment for generations and that no Marylander is left behind. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Vice Chairperson. I appreciate your time and the members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Tamar Sarnoff. I am the Director of the Public Libraries and State Networking Branch of the Maryland State Library Agency. We call it MSLA. I'm joined today by my colleague, Mary Ramey. She's a grants coordinator for the agency. And we are here on behalf of the agency and its board, which supports HB 243 and encourages a favorable review. Studies have shown that initiatives such as the Young Readers Program have positive impacts on school readiness and language and life skills development. It's notable that these programs are gaining popularity around the country. Funding for this program will have a widespread positive impact across the state. Washington, D.C., as well as nearly every county abutting Maryland, hosts similar programs. Passing HB 243 would make Maryland more appealing to families relocating to and within the Delmarva area. This program will enhance the workforce now by attracting young families and in a generation when participating Maryland's children join the workforce. The expansion of the Young Readers Program, as described in HB 243, would subsidize the distribution of books to more than 35,000 additional Maryland children under 5, nearly doubling the number of children who currently participate in a Young Readers Program. With the passage of HB 243, 20% of Marylanders under 5 will be able to receive a new book every month to encourage a love for reading and learning and to prepare children for school. HB 243 will enhance the work done by Maryland's public library community in providing high-demand services and resources to children under 5. Every year, Maryland Public Libraries lend millions of early reader materials and provide thousands of programs to the very young and their caregivers across nearly 200 locations. MSLA has produced a popular day-by-day early literacy calendar and produces Hatchlings, which teaches early literacy skills to expectant parents and parents of newborns. MSLA fully supports the passage of this bill, which will benefit all of Maryland now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to this panel for your testimony. We did have a person signed up virtually, but we do not see that person in the waiting room at this time. Are there any questions? Did I miss someone?
I believe I signed up.
What's your name?
Paula Hendry.
We did have you for virtual, and usually we don't allow a switch, but as a courtesy to the majority leader, if you can come up and...
I hope she's favorable, Madam Chair.
Yes. This is a favorable.
Good morning. Afternoon. I'm here to support Bill 243. I'm Paula Berinsky Hendry, and I coordinate the Dolly Parton Imagination Library in Annapolis. As a librarian in a high-poverty school in Annapolis for 18 years, I witnessed many 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students, clearly intelligent children, struggle to read. Copious research points to the fact that children who do not read on level by 3rd grade are less likely to graduate high school and more likely to end up in prison. Why do so many children fail to learn to read well by grade 3? One factor is that many were already far behind when they entered kindergarten. When a child enters kindergarten ready to succeed, they're almost twice as likely to master basic skills by age 11. The Maryland Kindergarten Readiness Test before the pandemic showed only 47% of 5-year-olds were prepared to succeed. After the pandemic, that very sad 47% overall rate dropped to 40%, and only 1/3 of African American children and less than 1/5 of Latino 5-year-olds were tested as ready. What can we do? We must start early because most of a child's brain development occurs before age 5. And we need to make high-quality reading materials available to families. Many low-income households have no children's books at all. A large study in 2010 showed that providing access to print materials improves reading performance, especially in kindergarten. In another large international study, children growing up in a home with at least 20 books get 3 more years of schooling than children from bookless homes, independent of their parents' education, occupation, and class. This bill is intended to help children develop the early literacy skills they need. In New York, children enrolled in this program for at least 3 years were significantly better prepared to enter kindergarten. In Tennessee, enrolled children outperformed non-participants in all categories at the end of kindergarten and at the end of 3rd grade. Let's front load our efforts to have every child in Maryland succeed in school by providing high-quality reading materials to our families.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you again to this panel. Any questions from members for this panel? All right. Seeing none and there being no opposition, this concludes the hearing on House Bill 243. Next, we have a bill from the Frederick County delegation, and this is House Bill 222. It's sponsor only since it's a local bill, and Delegate Miller, you can proceed.
Good afternoon, or almost evening, Madam Chair and my fellow Ways and Means Committee members. For the record, I am Delegate April Miller from District 4 in Frederick County, and I am here on the behalf of the Frederick County delegation to ask for your favorable report of our House Bill 222. And if you do note in your testimony, it also has the support of the County Executive of Frederick County, as well as the County Executive of Baltimore County and the Baltimore delegation as well. So we thank them all for their support. This is a very simple bill, and this is my first time doing this, so a little grace or so let me know if any feedback is appreciated. So it does have several of our Frederick County teachers have wanted to emulate the successful Baltimore County program of doing a Java shop or doing coffee in the schools for our special education students. So this bill is a way to fulfill their IEP goals, for career exploration. It is a way for them to get paid. It will generate funds for the program that allow it to support the program and to keep it going. It also helps provide an opportunity to expand the social emotional learning for some of our special education students, which can be very much a challenge at the high school level. Our students and teachers that support them would like to sell the coffee and organize a coffee business or shop that will only be open to fellow students, teachers, staff for a few hours during the school week. They have tried other options. They've tried smoothies and maybe healthier options, but they just have not sold well, or the cost has been too great for them to be successful in this program. So the goals of this program are very consistent with the career aspirations of the blueprint to be inclusive. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about inclusion, because we did hear from a previous panel about what that looks like and how much that means to students and families. Because this is actually so much more than inclusion, and inclusion doesn't have to be limited to classrooms, right? We want inclusion to be a way for students to be able to thrive in their schools, to be able to make a difference. And this is one way where they can do that. There are colleges now that are doing amazing work, which we heard about last night from one of our community members, as actually having the students be able to, students with Down syndrome, students with other developmental disabilities, be able to live on campus. These are kind of precursors for that, these programs. And then as researching this, I always look to see what other places are doing. And I actually happened, if you have your phone, and I don't know if this is allowed or will get us in any copyright trouble, but I will cite them. It's BiddyandBowsCoffee.com. Have any of you guys ever heard of that? Yes, I did not know that till I started researching this, and I was so excited. I would encourage you to look at that website. They have a franchise here in Annapolis, and it is the very front page of their site is a human rights movement disguised as a coffee shop. And if you look down, it is their desire, for their family's desire when they started this, to change the way people see people with disabilities. And that's how they got their brand. So that's what I would love to be able to see in the school. I would love to see other students seeing their peers as fully capable and engaged and immersed in a business type opportunity and program. And speaking from a business note, what's the first thing that somebody asks you when you come to Annapolis? They ask you, I don't know, I got tons of emails, let's have coffee. Let's go to coffee. So that, let's go. So that aspect of, like I said, career exploration and just regular engagement is amazing. I do want to say, at our high school, we have seen children with amazing abilities be homecoming queens. We have seen them play on football teams. We have seen them be such an integral part of our school communities that it's time for them to have this opportunity and explore these careers. So I think I covered everything. If you have any questions, please, I'm open to questions. Can I ask Delegate Fair, did I forget anything? Nope, okay, good. Thank you. We were gonna do this together, so I'm a little bummed because we wanted it to be a bipartisan fun show, but it's just me.
The bipartisanship is noted. Thank you so much, Delegate.
I appreciate that, thank you.
I am a big fan of Biddy and Bose, so that's wonderful. Any questions for Delegate Miller? All right, seeing none, that ends the hearing on House Bill 222. Next up is my bill, HB 306, and I am handing it over to Delegate Patterson for this bill.
All right. Thank you very much. House Bill 306, Delegate Wilkins and your panel. For those of you on Zoom in the waiting room, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you to the committee and my esteemed colleagues of Ways and Means. My turn in the hot seat. For the record, I am Delegate Janelle Wilkins, and I'm pleased to present HB 306, the Maryland Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports Membership Alteration. For some very quick background, in the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, we established the Maryland Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports. And that consortium is charged with the development of coordinating community supports and partnerships to meet students' behavioral health needs. So that's things like wraparound services, mental health, and other behavioral health aspects. But we forgot one critical aspect of that, and that is to include our school counselors as members of the consortium. Our school counselors play a really critical role for our students and already provide that type of coordination that the consortium is setting out to do. So this is a very simple bill in the sense that all it does is add the school counselors to the consortium that is already established. And so I do have Robin Elliott here to provide some additional details, but I ask for your favorable report on HB 306. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am here now wearing the hat, Robin Elliott of the Maryland School Counselors Association. I think this is a much easier bill than the one you saw me last on. It truly does just add a seat to this consortium. At the time you all put together the consortium, school counselors were very busy and just didn't realize that that process was going on. And now they've really identified they want to contribute. There are about 3,500 school counselors in Maryland. They're very similar to school nurses in that they're responsible for the well-being of every student in the school. And that's a little bit different than school psychologists or school social workers that see a child when they get a referral. So school counselors really are in a unique place to kind of survey the whole school and really understand what those behavioral health needs are and how to coordinate care. And so we really appreciate your consideration of this bill and happy to work with you all. And I would be remiss to not acknowledge the president of the School Counselors Association, Dr. Nikki Ham, who teaches school counseling at Bowie State, was going to be here today. She sends her apologies. She had a family emergency that she had to attend to. So thank you very much.
If not, this concludes the hearing on House Bill 306. Thank you very much.
Thank
And up
you.
next is House Bill 292, Delegate Patterson.
Hello, Madam.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee, colleagues. It is certainly my honor to once more sponsor a bill that will support military families, and that's what House Bill 292 is designed to do. This bill is entitled the Child Care Providers Registration and Licensing Exemptions. And what does it do? It provides a chance for exemption for family child care homes, large family child care homes, and certified properties that are on military bases, whether it's Department of Defense or the U.S. Coast Guard. And the passage of this bill, certainly for those of you who are concerned about child care, meets a critical need. Military families frequently move every 2 to 4 years, and finding safe, highly regulated, and affordable child care in a new community can be extremely challenging and daunting. In fact, it was reported that 23% of active duty families who have a child care need are unable to find child care. So the Department of Defense recognizes challenge and need to overhaul their child care system and begin to allow spouses of active duty military members to become certified to become child care providers in their homes on or off an installational base in government-owned leased housing and cited as a family child care centers. The practice that currently exists is really a duplicity. It represents a duplication of both what's required by the Maryland Department of Education and now Department of Defense. So we want to streamline this because a passage will prevent this duplication, and it turns the responsibility over to the Department of Defense, the State Department's Education Child Care Licensing and will be relieved of regulatory activities, including registration, facility inspection, technical assistance, investigations, and when necessary, enforcement, while at the same time continuing to provide a high level of child care for our children. There is a friendly amendment has been offered, clarifying the fact that the Department of Defense certified child care programs will serve military families exclusively, okay? And so I'm really asking respectfully for your vote favorably for House Bill 292 with the technical amendment. And I'm delighted to present my panelists that include Christopher Arnold, who I believe is virtual. He's with the U.S. Department of Defense. Clinton McSherry, who's Maryland Family Network, to my right, and the the benefactor of the cookies in the back, Lynn Nash, who's with the Maryland Military Coalition, Commission Officer, the Association of United States Public. Okay? Lynn.
I'm a nurse, 30 years on active duty, 11 years on active duty in the Army, and I was the community health nurse who was responsible for training and inspecting our child care centers and our family homes. In that period of time, never once did I have a home or a center fail. I was so good at it that they put me on the national inspection team. And I went all over the country doing this. So I'm here to tell you that first, anybody listen to the news today? $21,000 to care for a baby in Montgomery County, $21,000 a year. Preschool, $11,000. It's about $9,000 in a home versus a center. That's expensive. In the military, 29% of our families have 2 or more kids. So think 21 plus 11, and you're an E3. Child care centers are prorated in terms of cost. But I'm here to tell you that the providers are better trained than they are here in Maryland. The Maryland Military Coalition is 19 organizations. We represent family members of the military. We strongly support this bill, and I'm ready to answer any questions that you have about training. I even brought my old regulation, and I'm very well versed on the current version, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for this panel? Delegate Feldmark.
Chair. And thank you, Delegate Patterson, for this bill and for continuing to bring bills that help assist our military families. I guess my question is really just a clarification to make sure I'm understanding the intent properly here. This is exempting child care centers from our state regulatory certification if they are certified by a branch of the military or other federal agency, right? Or this is all just Department of Defense, correct?
That's
or is
correct.
it
And the US.
and U.S. Coast Guard?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not that a center couldn't be uncertified just because it's on federal property. It would still need to be certified by one of those departments. Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Delegate Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on that question, because I was a little confused about the wording here on page 2, line 3, and on line 25, where it says "or." So if the individual is located on the military base, do they not have to have the certification of the childcare? Should that word be "and" instead of "or"?
I'm not sure what page you're on.
Oh, sorry, I'm on page 2 of the bill.
Okay.
Line 3, just at the end of the first point there,
Okay.
located on the military base. It says "or certified," so it's one or the other. I was just curious, was it supposed to be "and" or?
I'm not sure.
No, okay.
If it's "and" or. I know that what we're trying to do is, what we're stressing is that they both require the same. Department of Education as well as Department of Defense have the same requirements. And so we feel that there is a duplication of requirements, and that the standards of the Department of Defense are very rigid, that would justify not having the duplicity that currently exists.
Of course.
But we can get you an answer to that "and" or.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Thanks so
Sure.
much, Delegate.
Any other questions? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 292, and we'll now proceed to our final bill of the day, House Bill 276, Delegate Dana Jones. And I believe you have one person who is informational who can come up.
Thank you so much, Vice Chairwoman. I'm thrilled to be here and also thrilled to go last because I needed plenty of time to go through my 7 pages here of testimony I have for you. Just kidding, not. For the record, I'm Delegate Dana Jones. I come before you today to introduce a bill that would fix an error made during the amendment process last year of state public library funding. It was passed during our previous session. As we all know and agree, libraries are a trusted community resource that is vital to the health and well-being of our community. Residents know that when they come to the library, they can feel confident in what they discover, what they receive, whether it's a COVID-19 test kit, to how to build a resume, kindergarten readiness classes, all of these resources proudly to serve everyone. In the 2022 legislative session in the General Assembly, we passed legislation that would increase funding for our state's public libraries. Prior to the bill's passage, it was amended. After the bill's passage, it was discovered that the amendment mistakenly removed 5 key words. You will see them on page 3, line 1, and each fiscal year thereafter. House Bill 276 does not change any of the formulas that we passed last year. It just adds back those mistakenly removed 5 words and each fiscal year thereafter. Ensuring this funding and correcting this drafting error is the least we can do for a statewide system that does so very much for all of our constituents. I respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 276, and if anyone has a question, I also am very happy that Christine Feldman from the Anne Arundel County Public Library System is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delegate. Any questions on this bill for Delegate Jones? All right, seeing no questions, that concludes the hearing for House Bill 276. That ends our work as a committee for today. The chair would like me to remind committee members that we have a committee event tonight at 7 p.m. and we will see everyone there. Thank you.